Today we have Eric McClanahan with us. I'm super stoked for this episode because this is going to be a little different than what we've done before. For those who have listened to our episodes, our fantasy draft episodes before, we'll do these like fantasy things where we'll pick like a team of like our favorite artists or whatever. But this is going to be a little different. This is actually a tournament, which Cullen and I, we've done a tournament. Remember we did our 2000s Metalcore tournament back with Dan Koch. That was a fun episode. This is even more. This is big time. This is 64 teams. This is the actual like NCAA tourney kind of tournament. But this is going to be a tournament of the best tooth and nail bands. Okay? Best tooth and nail bands. But the thing is, we're actually not picking the teams. This has already been decided for us. So this is what's going to really throw it for a loop. So our friend Eric McClanahan, over the last couple months, has been doing these really, really cool tournaments that have been somewhat centered around like the Christian music industry. A couple months ago, you did like the big CCM one that blew up, and then now you just did this tooth and nail one, and you've been doing some other ones as well. But as soon as I found out you were doing the tooth and nail one, I reached out and I was like, we need to talk about this because obviously that's the scene of music that Cullen and I cover. And so it just felt like the dumbest thing ever if we weren't getting you on the podcast to talk about this tournament. But this has been a tournament that's has gone on for the last couple of weeks, and thousands of people have voted in and have gone round by round voting their favorite tooth and nail artists through. And we're really excited to just kind of talk and recap. So what we're going to do is just literally go matchup by matchup. So we'll start in the first round matchups and then second, third, and so on and so forth. And we're just going to talk about kind of the matchups. Like, do we think the people chose right? Was this an upset that was worth the upset? Was the team that we thought would go all the way through the tournament getting through the tournament? So anyway, we're just going to talk and kind of recap matchup by matchup. But with that said, are there any other things that we need to mention, Cullen?
Well, to add a little bit of pretext, Mason and I, we muted Eric on Twitter.
Yes.
Solely for the idea that we didn't want to know, who was matched up against who, so we could talk about this fresh. Yeah.
Right. Well, and especially we did not want to know who the champion is. So as we're recording right now, the champion has been declared. The polls have closed. All right. So if you've been in line, get out of line because the polls have closed, and there has been a champion declared. But the thing is, we don't know who it is yet. So what we're going to do is once we get to the championship round, we're actually all going to look on Twitter and see who the champion is. So we're just really, really stoked about that.
So, Eric, tell us about yourself, man. How did you get involved in doing these in the first place? Because they're brilliant. Clearly you are like an encyclopedia of Christian music and alternative music. So what got you involved in these, and what do you do for life? Like, what do you do in your spare time and stuff?
Well, what got me started on these was, you followed me for a while. I tweet music. That's kind of been my main thing for quite a while. And a couple of my like choose one of these albums tweets kind of took off, and I kept getting more Christian music followers, people who are interested in that. And somebody suggested around March that I do a Christian music tournament, and I was like, okay, that sounds cool if people would be into it. So I did that, and it got a lot of traction, and people were like, okay,
yeah, like the Babylon Bee talked about it. I think Relevant even picked up on it. Like there was some big names in the Christian industry that,
not to mention the bands themselves were reaching out to you. So
yeah,
that's a pretty cool deal, man.
Yeah, it was. I did not expect that at all. It turned into something I was not prepared for, but it was fun. Did a couple other tournaments since then. Music's just kind of always been my main hobby. I like sports and stuff like that, but music's always kind of been the thing that I spend my free time thinking about. So yeah, that's kind of my story there.
Our goal here is to make you the Nate Silver of Christian music. So hopefully we can get you there.
Appreciate that.
And Eric, you are one of the few people, I think Cullen's one of these other folks, but there are very few people that I know who are as knowledgeable about the Christian music industry as you are. And there are some very niche bands that you've talked about in the, before that, we've talked about and that you've talked about on Twitter and stuff where I'm like, wow, I literally thought that I was the only other person in the world that remembers that Christian band. It's pretty impressive.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been pretty cool to see also that I'm not the only one who remembers some of those very small niche bands who played one music festival ever.
Yeah, isn't that weird? It's fun
Yeah.
that way though. I will
Yeah.
say though, Eric, you are by far the most knowledgeable person I know on it. So I know Mason was trying to give me a little credit, but I don't deserve any of that. You are like on the next level, man.
I appreciate that, but you guys know a lot too. My buddy Josh Baylog, he's the real encyclopedia of Christian music. Everybody should follow him on Twitter too.
I feel like this is like one of those things where it's like every therapist has a therapist, and we're just trying to like find whose therapist is like the kingpin therapist.
Yeah,
Somebody knows it all.
right.
We got to find that person.
All right, should we get going through talking through these matchups?
Let's do it.
I'm super stoked. Well, I think we should maybe start like top left, and then we'll just kind of go down.
Westernized of you. I don't know.
What's that?
That's so westernized of you. I think
I
we should
know.
go. I think we should go right, left.
Should we go right, left? All right.
Let's go right,
we'll
left.
start.
Yeah.
Should we go top right or bottom right?
Let's go top right.
All right. You want the top? All right. Great.
Yeah.
So, all right. So the first matchup, the 1 and 16 matchup, is Jeremy Camp at number 1, and then Seventh Day Slumber at number 16. And we, right out of the gate, already get a massive upset. A 16 seed beating a number 1 seed. Seventh Day Slumber barely squeaks by the number 1 seed Jeremy Camp. I honestly was not expecting this. These are like two artists that I'm like not all that interested in, but the fact that Seventh Day Slumber was able to beat out Jeremy Camp is pretty impressive. Did you guys think that would happen at all?
I did not think that would happen. It actually makes me angry because I went to a Seventh Day Slumber show one time, and they played like 3 songs, and they just preached the rest of the time, and it pissed me off. So
I didn't expect it. It kind of pissed me off too because as a bracket maker, you don't want to see a 16 take down a 1. That was a major failure on my part there, I think. But
well, speaking of which, did you kind of rank these based off of like Spotify plays or just like perceived popularity or what?
I used a lot of Spotify numbers, looked up the streaming numbers for every artist that had a chance of making it. And I just generally knowing kind of who's done well in my other tournaments and stuff.
Sure.
Used a lot of that for seeding. And actually, I talked to someone who, an anonymous source who we'll say knows a whole lot about the bands in this tournament, and got some pointers there too.
Perfect.
Wow, an anonymous source. We're already working with the cartel or what?
The KGB.
Jesus. Well, one of the things that's interesting about Jeremy Camp is he probably is, at least like album sales wise, maybe the biggest Tooth and Nail artist sales wise.
Easily.
Yeah.
I think he's got 4 or 5 gold albums.
Yeah.
Like this is not like a number 1 seed that like just happened to get a number 1 seed. Like
Right.
This is arguably maybe at least popularity wise, probably the most popular Tooth and Nail artist. Now, here's what's going to be interesting. We'll see this run through, I think, the rest of the tournament. There are going to be artists who are technically on Tooth and Nail, but a lot of Tooth and Nail fans aren't necessarily fans of those bands, right? They just happen to be on Tooth and Nail. I think, honestly, I think like Thousand Foot Crutch is sort of in that vein of the average Tooth and Nail fan wasn't particularly interested in TFK, but TFK was just a big band outside of Tooth and Nail. So I think we're going to see that through line throughout this entire tournament. But this is one example of that, of Jeremy Camp being technically a Tooth and Nail artist, but people really all the Tooth and Nail fans aren't like particularly Jeremy Camp fans, right? All Jeremy Camp fans are outside the Tooth and Nail world.
That said, I would love to know how many other albums that we love, that Jeremy Camp essentially bankrolled.
That's true.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
True. That is very true. Yeah. There are so many. Yeah, I bet there's a few artists on here that even artists that we don't really like, but they have made Tooth and Nail a lot of money where they Tooth and Nail use that money to fund some other bands that weren't going to be as profitable. But anyway, well,
Totally.
number 1 seed goes down. And so Seventh Day Slumber moves on. Who are they going to compete against? It is between KJ52 at the 8th seed and Falling Up as the 9th seed. And again, barely squeaking by, Falling Up beats KJ52. Any surprises here? What are your thoughts about this matchup?
I thought it would be a close one. Of course, me being the Falling Up fanboy that I am, I was hoping it would be a favorable matchup for them. But I mean, people like KJ52 has interacted with my tweets and stuff, so I was like, he could easily get a hold of this and retweet it and win.
Blow it up.
But he never responded to people tagging him in it and stuff. So
Wow. He's too busy pastoring.
I guess so.
Yeah, I don't really. I liked Falling Up way more than KJ52, although I don't really have an affinity for either one of these artists. But I do think Falling Up is genuinely a much better artist, just like artistically.
I'm in agreement.
So, anyway, I guess like no surprises there. It was an 8 versus 9 matchup, so it should have been close, and it was close. Which in a like actual NCAA tournament game, like you want to see a good 8-9 matchup. So that worked out well. All right, so Falling Up is going to be matched up against Seventh Day Slumber. We're going to get back to that once we get to the second round. But next matchup, Disciple versus Joy Electric. This is one that, like I was just talking about, this whole like through line of Tooth and Nail artists that weren't really all that loved by Tooth and Nail fans. This is one that actually surprises me. Joy Electric is beloved by older Tooth and Nail fans, and the fact that it was it was as much of a win by Disciple really surprised me. I would have thought Joy Electric at the very least would have put up more of a fight, but ultimately Disciple kind of handed it to him.
I think this one is because Disciple had that one album that actually went pretty hard.
So hard that somebody even busted their eye open to it.
This is very true. Mason has a very fun story. He could probably share real quick.
Yeah. So Cullen and I, this was like, 15 years ago now, Cullen? It was like one of the first years that you and I were friends. And we went down to Brookings because Disciple, it was like Disciple, Project 86. There was another kind of big band. I'm forgetting right now.
Children
18-3. That's right. So those three bands were playing, and during Disciple, we were right up front, and it's one of those. They were on a stage that was sort of probably like chest high, and I was headbanging along. I think it was even to like that big song called "Game On." I loved that one.
Yep.
And I was headbanging, and I hit my head on one of those monitors that were right on the stage right there. And initially, like I was like, oh, like I hit my head, and I didn't really think much of it. But then I started feeling like a lot of like liquid like going down my face, and I'm like, this feels more than just sweat. And I like wipe my hand, and I just see like red everywhere on my hand, and I'm like, oh shit. And so I go over immediately. They like, these people see my like head bleeding, and so they give me a towel really quick. I guess there was like a nurse in the back, so I go to this nurse, and she looks at it, and she's like, oh, you for sure need stitches. And so I have to call my mom. The funny story about this of me calling my mom is before I left, my mom, so it was Cullen and a couple of our friends, and we're going to be staying in this town that was about 45 minutes away from where we grew up. And all of them were older than me. Cullen was a couple years older than me, and the rest of the guys were older than me. And my mom told me, she was like, all right, Mason, I trust these guys. I totally trust them. But if you happen to find yourself in a situation where there's alcohol and you feel uncomfortable, because I was like 7th or 8th grade at this point. I was really young. And she was like, if you find yourself in a situation where you feel really uncomfortable where there's alcohol, just know you can call me right away, and we will be the bad cops about this, and we'll get you and take you out of that situation. So she gets this call at like, 10 o'clock at night when I busted my head open, and she's immediately thinking, oh shit, Cullen took out a bunch of alcohol and they're all drinking now. And sure enough, that's not the case. I was like, Mom, I broke my head open. She was like, what? I'm like, yeah, I like my eyebrow, like I hit my head on this thing and my eyebrow's bleeding and I'm being told that I need stitches. So the nurse like grabs the phone and she was like, yeah, I'm a nurse and he really needs stitches. So Cullen takes me to the emergency room. I get my stitches and we come back because we thought maybe the show is still going on by the time that I get done with my stitches. We come back and they were like tearing down everything. The merch table was starting to get torn down and the band was right there, Disciple. And they were like, you guys are a little late for this show. And we're like, no, we were there. And then like this happened and you point to my stitches and they were like, what? And they were like, did that happen at our show? And we're like, yeah, that happened at your show. And so then they gave me a free CD. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It was probably the most metal moment at any Disciple show.
That's true. That is true. All right. So Disciple is going on to the second round. The next matchup, so who they'll go against, is either between Hawk Nelson and Bebo Norman. So a 4 versus 13 matchup.
I find this one hilarious.
This is really, really funny. And very convincingly, Hawk Nelson wins, which does not surprise me at all. I don't think there's any surprise here. Honestly, I forgot that Bebo Norman was even on Tooth and Nail. Like, for what, a couple albums?
Yeah, I forgot that too, to be honest, until I was researching this.
That was a hilarious matchup, but Hawk Nelson moves on, and they'll be going against Disciple. Yeah, I was pretty surprised that even Bebo Norman would even make this tournament, but his streaming numbers must be really big, or what?
Well, I put him in because I wanted some of the more mainstream CCM followers of mine to have a little bit more interest in it than they would have.
A little more variety.
Yeah, if somebody else had been in that spot. So, but apparently there weren't many people who were interested in him being there.
That is true. That is true. All right, so the next matchup, and I don't even know one of these artists. Project 86 versus 7th. What is this?
7th Time Down.
7th Time Down. I don't think I've ever heard this artist in my life. Who is 7th Time Down?
They are kind of like I've not listened to a whole lot of their stuff. From what I gather, they're kind of like a rock worship, kind of like Seventh Day Slumbers, more worshipful stuff. But one of their songs has like 200 million streams or something like that. So
what years were they on Tooth and Nail?
It's been recent. I think like their big song I think came out in like 2019 or something like that.
Really?
So, yeah.
I am completely unfamiliar, but I think partly because they're such a new artist to Tooth and Nail, and Project 86 is such a storied artist on Tooth and Nail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they just absolutely demolished them, 90% to 10%. That's there's not gonna be a recount for this one. Let's put it that way.
Definitely not. It's not Florida.
Anyway, any thoughts around Project 86? 86 just absolutely dominating right away.
I suppose we'll come back around. We can share some more stories with Project 86. But yeah, this isn't a surprise to me. I don't know, Eric, was it a surprise to you at all?
No, I actually had 7th Time Down as the 16 seed until talking with the source and was talked into them being higher. So I didn't really expect a lot from them.
I bet you probably get a lot of hate for how you seeded these artists.
I always do. This one, I did actually think that I've had less hate about this one out of any of the 3 or 4 I've done so far.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't disagree so much with some of the seeding. I mean, there's like a few where I'm like, I would have like maybe put that one a little higher or lower or whatever. But for the most part, I do generally agree with your seeding. So I think you're pretty good on that. All right, so next one is Cutlass versus 9 Lashes. Cutlass easily wins against 9 Lashes. I feel I know what Cutlass sounds like. Is 9 Lashes kind of a Cutlassy sounding band too, right? I'm not really familiar with them.
Yeah, I think they're a little bit heavier. I've not listened to a whole lot. Yeah, just maybe Skillet type Disciple kind of vein.
It is remarkable how many of those artists are on Tooth and Nail. And again, like these are artists that they happen to be on Tooth and Nail, but they're not beloved by Tooth and Nail fans, really.
Right.
Like Seventh Day Slumber is one of those. Cutlass, I feel like Cutlass maybe a little bit more than others, but Nine Lashes, this Seventh Time Down band. Like there are a lot of these bands that have that kind of like, I don't really like sort of a butt rock sound. I don't know how else to like describe it, but they have a butt
Yeah.
rock sound, and literally you could be any band with a butt rock sound, even on Tooth and Nail, and you will become a massive band. It's unbelievable how successful those bands end up becoming.
Yeah, they've clearly done pretty well with switching from pure album sales to streaming as far as signing these kinds of bands, because their streaming numbers are rich for these kinds of bands.
Right.
Well, that's our friend Jeremy Schaefer, who has his own recording studio. He says a lot of the bands that come in and work with him are like that active rock kind of sound.
Mhm.
And he says you would be surprised at how many more album sales they will have compared to anything that Earthgroans does, which is his band, or anything in that realm. It's just so much more palatable to the general audience. And those guys who wear like the clean hands, dirty hands, clean money shirts or whatever, yeah, it's directed towards them, but that is a larger proportion of the population than I think what we often give it credit for.
So Cutlass defeats Nine Lashes and will face up against Project 86 in the second round. Next one, Plink Eye versus Manifest. I saw this maybe a couple years ago. I remember Manifest being like this white Canadian rapper guy, and maybe I listened to a song or two back when he first got signed to Tooth and Nail, but I looked him up, like having just totally, he was off my radar for probably like 10 years at least. And then looked him up one day because I was like, oh, that's an artist I remember. Like, this is probably one of those rappers that, did like a Tooth and Nail album or two and then like called it quits and probably has maybe a few hundred monthly listeners on Spotify. How wrong could I have been? He is massive on Spotify. I had no idea that he got as big as he did. But also, Plink Eye, again, is one of those bands that even though they might not be big in streaming numbers, they are beloved, especially by older Tooth and Nail fans. And so this is a tough matchup against Manifest. And ultimately, Plink Eye actually pretty handedly wins. But I still cannot believe how big Manifest got after I totally forgot about him.
Yeah, he did a bunch of stuff with like Toby Mac and stuff like that, right? Is that where he kind of got his start, if I remember right?
It likely. I do know he had one song that was big that I didn't even know. It was kind of like a pump up type song, but I remember hearing that maybe in like the early 2010s or late 2000s or something. But I remember that song being pretty big, and even on Spotify, I think it's one of his bigger songs. But I just cannot believe. I mean, he's got several hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners. I mean, he's still probably making an entire career just out of music.
Yeah, it has to be. I think when I was researching it, he had 906,000 monthly listeners.
Almost 1 million monthly listeners.
Yeah.
Almost, for this guy
Wow.
who you would totally think that would have fizzled out immediately, but
yeah,
he's made it. He's made it.
That's more monthly listeners than like your one hit wonders from the 90s.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's see.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah, certainly.
He probably had about the third most monthly listeners.
I bet Manifest has more monthly listeners. I bet Manifest has twice as many monthly listeners as Rusted Root.
Yeah, probably.
All right, so Plink Eye, though, ultimately prevails, even though we've been talking about Manifest. I do really like Plink Eye, actually, a lot. They were one of those bands that had such a quintessential late 90s sound that fit so perfectly in Tooth and Nail. And again, they were beloved. I mean, people loved Plink Eye.
Big cult following.
Huge cult following.
And still listening to them today. A lot of people
They
do,
would,
so
honestly,
it makes
be, if Furnace Fest brought them back, they would be a headliner on that one kind of emo indie stage, I bet, Cullen. I guarantee it.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe not quite a headliner, but they'd be towards the top of the list. For sure.
I mean, they are that beloved. But anyway, Plink Eye ultimately prevails. Who are they going to be matched up against? Well, it's either going to be OC Supertones or Citizens. This does feel like kind of a one of those matchups where it's just totally outmatched. OC Supertunes, again, such a beloved band in the Tooth and Nail world, and Citizens is just so new that it's hard to like build up that cult following that you really need for a tournament like this. But Citizens, aren't they kind of more? I don't. And I haven't really listened to them much. Are they kind of more of one of those worshipy kind of artists?
Yeah, they came out of the
Yeah.
Mars Hill kind of
Oh,
worship
so
band.
like, so they're like
I
King's Kaleidoscope then.
Yeah, I think I don't quote me on that. I
Less
think they
edgy.
came from I know they were in that same kind of scene with King's Kaleidoscope. So maybe I just assumed they came from there,
Okay.
but maybe not.
But nonetheless, they're one of those bands that, again, they just are, I think, probably too new. And especially these worship bands, or mostly worship bands that were a part of Tooth and Nail, they might have done well sales wise, but the fan base is going to be more passionate about a band like OC Supertones, and certainly that was the case. So OC Supertones moves on, and they will be competing against Plink Eye in the next round. All right, so that's one region. Now we move on to the next region. Do we want to go bottom right, Cullen, or where do we want to go here?
Yeah, we might as
All right,
well.
so now we're on the bottom right region. Number 1 seed versus number 16 seed. Under Oath versus O Sleeper. This is one where I thought O Sleeper was probably. This is where I would have disagreed with some of your seeding here. O Sleeper still probably has like maybe 100,000 or more monthly listeners, and they're also beloved by tooth and nail bands. I thought they would be higher than a 16 seed. Not to say that they should be higher than maybe like a 13 seed or something, but I was really shocked when I saw this matchup. And I honestly thought that this could be closer than maybe as much as Under Oath is so beloved, like there are a lot of O Sleeper fans out there, and I thought it might be a little bit closer for a 1 versus 16 matchup. But ultimately, Under Oath prevails, and I didn't fill out a bracket, but I would have had Under Oath going to the championship. So this would have for sure been a pick for Under Oath for me, even though I really like O Sleeper. Any thoughts on this one?
I would agree with you, Mason. Yeah. I am kind of surprised that they were 16 seed, but looking at the rest of the seedings here, it does make sense because there's a lot of bands kind of in that same realm
Right.
as Own Sleeper. If you're talking like Haste a Day or Silent Planet or Fit for a King, like they're all kind of in that same, I would say, echelon, but they're so close, you got to seed them somewhere. So I get this 16 seed.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I think you can make a case for them up to about 13. I definitely probably should have had them at least 15 or 14, but before seeding, Becoming the Archetypes, one of those bands that I felt
Right.
like I had a lot of fans of who were followers of mine on Twitter. So I kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt there. But then once I released the bracket, I realized, oh, I got a lot of those Sleeper fans here too. So that was a misseed on my part.
Anytime we've talked to Jason and Seth from Becoming the Archetype, they really put themselves really below in that echelon of those metal bands on Solid State, and I guarantee that they would have put O Sleeper higher than them. Just knowing how Jason,
but they're also annoyingly
well,
evil.
that's true too. That's true.
So
But anyway, I honestly, it was a tough matchup for me because I really do like O Sleeper. Under Oath is one of my favorite bands of all time, and so obviously I was gonna pick them. But for a 1 versus 16 seed, I wish it would have been an easier choice for me. But ultimately, I picked Under Oath, and it's tough to see O Sleeper. I feel like they're a band that at least deserves to be in the second round, and so it's tough that they got such a hard matchup right away. But anyway.
I would go so far as to say everything in this section of the bracket is there's no easy ones in this section of the bracket.
Right.
They're all going to be difficult.
And I'm just realizing this part of the bracket is almost all, if not all, exclusively solid state bands, right?
Yeah, this is Solid State post 90s, or at least RSU released something in the 2000s or 10s on Solid State.
Right. Yeah, how did you kind of was there thought going on in these regions? Like how did you kind of figure region stuff out? Like cuz there clearly are themes in each one of these regions.
Yeah, the top left is 90s artists who released stuff in the 90s. I wanted the main reason that I separated them into categories is because the numbers and stuff of the 90s artists are just not comparable with
Right.
the newer artists. So I decided to make a region for that. So I just decided to also do one for BEC, and then on the bottom left is the 2000s and 10s tooth and nail. And then on the bottom
So
right,
you
solid
have the
state.
BEC at the top right, correct? But was OC Supertones a BEC band?
Yep, they
They
were.
were. Oh, I didn't
Yep.
realize that. Okay.
hmm
Huh. And yeah, Hawk Nelson was later on with their more worshipy stuff. That would make interesting.
Yeah,
And
some of
Disciple
them.
was too.
Yeah, some of them,
Really?
were back and forth between a couple of the labels. So just kind of whatever I had extra room for them in is kind of where I slotted them in at.
Interesting.
I think it makes perfect sense, man.
All right.
you.
So Under Oath moves on, probably expected to at least the second round. So second matchup in that region, Haste the Day versus Silent Planet. This is a tough one for a lot of people, but Haste the Day, I thought this was going to be really, really close. Haste the Day pretty convincingly won. I don't remember if I voted Haste the Day or Silent Planet. I love both bands a lot. And this was probably in the first round one of the harder picks for me. But I ended up, again, I don't know who it was, but obviously Haste the Day pretty convincingly won. Any thoughts around this one?
This one makes perfect sense to me as well. Yeah, like Silent Planet's big now. They've had some killer albums, and they have kind of that cult following, but so does Haste the Day, and they've just been around a little longer. So
Right.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I wasn't real sure which way that one would go. Just I don't have as firm of a grasp on the modern metalcore scene as I did in the in the 2000s. So I kind of wasn't sure what kind of numbers Silent Planet would pull, but
Sure.
Well, Haste the Day will be at Furnace Fest this year. Also, Eric, you going to be at Furnace Fest this year?
I don't think I'm going to make it this year.
Oh, Eric.
I know. I got to meet you guys there last year, and I was there the year before. It's just a lot going on this summer, and yeah.
Well,
God dang,
no
man.
Haste the Day reunion for you.
No, not this time.
We'll see you in 2024, though, right?
Hopefully.
All right, cool.
We'll try to make sure that actually happens. So, all right. So, Haste the Day versus Under Oath. That's going to be a fun matchup. Next one, Fit for a King versus As Cities Burn. The first big upset in this bracket. Now, again, here's one of these things where it's like As Cities Burn really has a cult following among tooth and nail people. I mean, they were right in that same era that Under Oath was getting big, and As Cities Burn was such a beloved band at that time. And Fit for a King, their numbers are big. They're a huge band. But they don't have quite the cult following that As Cities Burn does. And As Cities Burn pretty convincingly beats Fit for a King as a 12 seed over a 5 seed, which I think might surprise some people. But honestly, As Cities Burn really does have that cult following. Honestly, I'm one of those people. We've interviewed Fit for a King. They're great, wonderful. But As Cities Burn is one of my favorite bands of all time.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, you compare the streaming numbers. Fit for a King monthly listeners 964,000 to As Cities Burns 39,000. So
it's hard to believe that might be. I would be really curious to see in these matchups what is the biggest disparity between streaming numbers, and especially if there's an upset with one of those. That would be. This might be one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest.
Gotta be. Yeah, that's probably.
I got it. Yeah,
that's incredible. It's hard to believe that As Cities Burn has that few of streaming numbers. And again, I think of them as like in that 2000s era of especially Solid State, I think of them as one of the bigger bands. And it is really hard to believe that they just weren't able to like make it over that hump in a lot of, in comparison to some of those other Solid State bands. It's really hard to believe.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I think there's another instance in which you can look at the Spotify numbers, and it's one of those that will lie to you. It's a number that'll lie to you,
right?
Because I do think that they're probably worth more than 39,000 streams. maybe more people are listening on CD or on vinyl
Right.
or something else, maybe on MP3 players or iPods. I don't know, but um, I can't believe that they have such few
There are
streams.
several that really surprised me, like having under 10,000 streams. Plank Eye, Stavesacre, both under 10,000 monthly listeners, and
Wow,
yeah,
yeah, that blows my
yeah,
mind.
But here's the thing: each one of those people, if let's say if like Stave Saker or Plank Eye went on tour right now, each one of those people would for sure go and buy a ticket. So like that
Yeah,
you have roughly 10,000 tickets. In comparison to a band like Fit for a King who has almost 1 million monthly listeners, I guarantee you that most of those million people would not buy a ticket right now to see Fit for a
yeah.
King.
true.
Well, and we see that with our downloads on the podcast too. I mean, we'll have on like the guitars from Skid Row, and that one does half as good as when we have Derek Webb on, for instance.
It's
It's
just
just
like what
it's
doesn't
it's
make sense.
surprising to me.
Yeah,
But yeah, that
Yeah,
there is something about like kind of that cult following thing that happens. It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean,
mhm.
Stave Saker is probably one of our bigger episodes. I would say maybe like top 10 or
yeah,
so. And
Well,
it's got to be. Yeah,
we've had Fit for a King on. And I
yeah,
bet they have more monthly listeners. Stave Saker's had more downloads than Fit for a King from, yeah.
100%. It's
wow.
not even
And
close.
there's a lot of
Yeah,
other factors to that, but it does say that if a band is willing to share an episode, share our episode, the you can tell what bands have the cult following. I mean, it's clear as
yeah,
day.
Mhm.
So anyway,
yeah.
all right. So that is sorry, where was I?
5 and 12. Now we're on to Demon Hunter
Yes, Demon
versus He
Hunter
Is Legend.
versus He Is Legend. Obviously, I
See
know
this,
what you would pick, Cullen.
yeah, this one's so like
But
mean to
actually,
me.
I was
Just
really
because,
surprised that Demon Hunter was this low. Demon Hunter is one of those bands that has actually like pretty good streaming numbers and has a very dedicated tooth and nail following. And
yeah,
so that I was really shocked by the fact that they were a number 4 seed. I'm not like the biggest Demon Hunter fan, so I wouldn't have like put them probably really any higher, but just personally, but it was shocking that they were at number 4. But this is a tough matchup for He Is Legend, and ultimately Demon Hunter wins pretty convincingly.
yeah. I find this one kind of unfortunate because if you think about like He Is Legend, for instance, had songs on like video games and stuff like that, and in movies even, and for some reason, like their popularity, even though like they have that cult following, just like Demon Hunter does, their popularity never really took off quite the same way as Demon Hunter. But Demon Hunter doesn't really have a song that like everyone knows either.
Right.
So it's a goofy one to me.
It is interesting.
Eric, what do you think about that?
I'm streaming as far as all these bands in this region. Streaming wise, there were the top 5 seeds have significantly more streams than any of the ones
Yeah,
underneath. So I'm not surprised that Demon Hunter, who has 5 times the streams of He Is Legend, won. And I feel like kind of He Is Legend has that, I'm Hollywood's a really beloved album, but I think
yeah,
Demon Hunter. One thing I learned through someone I follow on Twitter who tweeted, quote tweet with the song that made you a fan of metal. And I think second to Living Sacrifice was Demon Hunter, as
Hmm.
with number of people who said so. I think
interesting.
they're a gateway band for a lot of people.
I could see that. I could see that. Which is interesting to me because they're not really that accessible to a lot of most people, you know.
Yeah.
But, the United States military loves them,
It's
so
true,
I
that's
guess it
gonna,
makes sense.
there's a multi-billion-dollar funding for Demon Hunter, so they've got a lot of backing. That actually reminds me of something I've thought through is what's cool about these tournaments that you've been doing, Eric, is there have been enough people engaging in it where I think you could actually make legitimate conclusions about about what's happening in these tournaments. It would be
Totally.
one thing if like 5 people were voting and that's it, but you have several thousand people, and I don't remember what like the whole like kind of standard for like making sociological conclusions is, but you're getting enough people where it's probably you're starting to get really close to making some conclusions sociologically about some of these bands, which is really interesting because you just have so much engagement with these tournaments. So that's really cool. Is that like you could probably like if somebody were to do a PhD on tooth and nail history, they could probably actually cite this as a legitimate source because of how many people are engaging in it.
That would be pretty awesome. I'm glad people are into it.
So, all right. So, Demon Hunter beats out He Is Legend. Really unfortunate pick for just a unfortunate draw for He Is Legend. I really like He Is Legend much more than Demon Hunter, but it is what it is.
This next one,
the people were pissed with you about this one. This one feels like you definitely you had your hand in this this selection. But Norma Jean versus the Chariot. People were so mad at you for this. This was awesome. And it actually ended up. Actually, I wasn't surprised. Actually, I really thought that wherever the Chariot was going to be on this, I don't think they were going to make it out of the first round, likely, unless they got it like a really easy draw versus like some band like, I don't know, like The Fold
Bebo
or something. But I really was not thinking that the Chariot was going to get out of the first round anyway, even though they're my favorite band of all time. But the fact that you put them against Norma Jean, oh, you
done them dirty,
you
man.
did it dirty, Eric. Yeah, I'm sure you had a hand in that, right?
I thought it would be fun. Most people did not. But I think Norma Jean had to be the 6. So
yeah,
I was figuring the Chariot anywhere between 9 and 12 or so. So I was like, yeah, it'd be kind of fun,
this is also
right?
again a seeding thing where I was really surprised that Norma Jean was this low. In terms of obviously streaming numbers, Norma Jean isn't going to be quite as big as like A Fit for a King or whatever, but Norma Jean is kind of this perfect mix of a band where they're just big enough where they do have pretty decent streaming numbers. Like I bet they're probably over 200,000 monthly listeners.
209,000.
Yeah, and they're also like each one of those people are probably going to buy an album or actually go to one of their shows. Like they have pretty large shows for the most part if they play a big enough city. And I was a little surprised then that they would be a number 6 seed, in comparison to like other number 6 seeds like Copeland. Like Copeland is not going to be drawing the same people at a crowd as Norma Jean is, or who else did you have as a 6 seed? Project 86 maybe, Slick Shoes probably not, but anyway, there were some other 6 seeds where I'm like, Norma Jean seems to be a way better 6 seed than all the other 6 seeds, which to me was like, maybe they should have been a little higher. I could see Norma Jean being like a number 3 seed, maybe, but anyway, that I was a little surprised how low they actually were on that.
It didn't feel right putting them there, but like I said, the top 5's streaming numbers were so much more than the next set, and really all I have to go by is that and just a general impression of people. And
right.
It was also kind of hard to compare the newer bands like Fit for a King with somebody like Norma Jean, because like I said, ashamedly, I'm not as into the metalcore scene as I used to be, so I don't really have a feel for how dedicated the fans of a band like Fit for a King are.
Right. Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I understand the case for them to be higher, but like the Devil Wears Prada and August Burns Red, Under Oath, all have way more streams and probably way more fans.
100%. That makes sense, and especially if this region's going to be like more of a solid state region, I get from like a streaming standpoint to have them a little lower, but I do think like Norma Jean in comparison to some of these other ones, like they deserve to be higher. If there was completely intermixed, I think they would have been higher. But anyway, that's my only gripe with that one. Honestly, I think I probably voted for the Chariot just because they're my favorite band, but also like I would say Norma Jean might be like a top 5 favorite artists of all time for me. So like, this is like really like, trying to choose your favorite child type of thing.
I'm surprised it was such a wide margin of difference. I wasn't expecting it to be 70-30. I was expecting it to be closer to like a 50-50 draw. So kind of an impressive one to me. I don't know.
All right, so Norma Jean moves on, and they will be competing against either August Burns Red or Wolves at the gate. August Burns Red number 3. That makes sense to me. I mean, they are such a big band in that world.
Yeah.
It was interesting that Wolves at the Gate even got into this, but Wolves at the Gate does have pretty good streaming numbers, and so we've interviewed them once, and great folks. But yeah, I feel like August Burns Red versus Wolves at the Gate. That seems like kind of a quintessential matchup of like what I would expect: a 3 versus a 14 with these two bands, and also August Burns Red wins in as what I would consider as much of a convincing fashion as it should be with Wolves at the Gate. So this feels like a very quintessential, this is exactly how you would expect this matchup to go.
Yep.
Yeah, Wolves at the Gate, they had the streaming numbers worth being there, but I know like my friends who write for Jesus Freak Hideout and stuff are real big fans of them. So I knew that I had some Wolves at the Gate devotees who would be involved in this. So that's kind of why.
Also, there's some of the more vocal fans online from what I've seen too.
Yeah.
So they've definitely got that cult like following starting to boil up.
Also, speaking of Jesus Freak Hideout, we need to get those folks on this podcast, Cullen.
That's a great point. I don't know why we haven't even thought about that yet.
We should do
They're
that.
all great guys.
Eric, you connect them with us, and we'll make that happen. That would be my whole like gateway into all of this was mostly because of Jesus Freak Hideout. So that would be it would be an honor for both Cullen and I. All right, so
totally.
August Burns Red versus Norma Jean in the second round. What a hell of a matchup right there. All right, so next one in this region, Living Sacrifice, number 7 seed versus Dead Poetic.
This one surprised the hell out of me.
This does not surprise me who wins, but this also feels like this is so close because Dead Poetic still has really great streaming numbers, honestly. But Living Sacrifice,
which surprises that surprises me so much.
It is.
I
it
would
is shocking.
never have guessed.
I do think like Dead Poetic with their streaming numbers, I think it really signifies, or at least it tells the story that they could have been so much bigger had they not quit so early. But versus Living Sacrifice, I mean, Living Sacrifice. Cullen, if we got Living Sacrifice on and they actually shared the episode, it'd probably be one of our biggest. I mean, that's how dedicated this fan base is. So it was actually pretty close. 54% Living Sacrifice versus 46% Dead Poetic. It was pretty close. This was a pretty tough matchup, and I don't remember who I voted. I mean, maybe I voted Dead Poetic, but this was something else.
The
next round will make that even more interesting there. So I'm excited to talk about that.
I was just going to say, Living Sacrifice and Dead Poetics that was one of the toughest ones for me because they're both probably top 25 bands all time for me. Yeah.
Wow.
And like you said, I think Dead Poetic they were on the verge of being a big time player.
I mean, they really had the same sound as Thursday, and Thursday really blew up in that world, and Thursday still has a very dedicated following. We interviewed their drummer a while back, and he's great, and Thursday's so big, and to me, like that sound at that time was so big, and it's hard to believe that it like they could have been big, but for a variety of reasons just didn't make it.
Yeah.
All right, so Living Sacrifice moves on. Last matchup of this region, The Devil Wears Prada versus Becoming the Archetype. I don't remember who I voted for on this, honestly. Becoming the Archetype has a very underrated fan base. Let's just put it that way. Like, I think they do have a cult following, and I don't think people really recognize how big their cult following actually is. But obviously, Devil Wears Prada is so big in this world. And I've got another point to make in a second, but I'll let you guys say a thing about this matchup. But anyway, I thought this was just a tough matchup for Becoming the Archetype.
Very tough. I think that Devil Wears Prada, it's no surprise they win. Becoming the Archetype is just such a they're such like an outlier in this group, because they're doing something very different than any of these other bands. So I think anyone that they get put up against, they probably don't win in this whole section, this whole region, I should say. But I think that they probably deserve to win. So I don't know. It's a tough one.
Do you have something to say, Eric, about it?
Yeah, they're a great band. They're one of the, I think what Brandon Ebel would refer to as a cred band. They may not have, the massive number of fans that a lot of the other bands do, but they're clearly an incredible band. And it was down as far as putting who in the tournament. It was down between Becoming the Archetype, O Sleeper, and Phineas for the last 3 spots for me. And Phineas had the best streaming numbers of the 3, but I thought Becoming the Archetype deserved to be there. So
well, and their new album they put on vinyl and it sold out immediately, which again tells you it's hard for a lot of tooth and nail bands to sell vinyl right now unless they're like a really dedicated, have a dedicated cult following. And clearly Becoming the Archetype does. I mean, they literally sold out that vinyl really quickly.
Yeah.
So it really
in fact,
tells
they had to do a repress already.
Yeah. Exactly.
That never happened.
Yeah, never. Yeah. Exactly. One thing I'll just mention about this bracket, because it was the solid state bracket or the solid state region in this bracket. Because Cullen, we did the 2000s metalcore episode, the tournament a few months ago, and I think we had 16 teams in that, if I remember right. And it's all the best like 2000s metalcore bands. I bet a third to half of those bands were tooth and nail bands that are in this bracket right now.
Yeah.
So you have in one region, you have like 5, 6, maybe even 7 bands that are also literally considered some of the best 2000s metalcore bands, regardless if it's Christian or not. This is an incredibly competitive bracket in terms of the style and scene of music that it's in. And so it was really cutthroat, but it still is a testament of how dominant a Christian label was in a particular genre of music. It still blows my mind that was a thing that happened historically in Christian music. I can't believe it that a bunch of metalcore bands, Christian metalcore bands, dominated the non-Christian music scene in that scene for a good 10 years. It's unbelievable to me.
It's got to be the only time in recent history that Christians have kind of, led the way in a subset of music.
Right. I mean, totally. I mean, there's a few other like one-off bands here or there that were Christian bands that I think were really influential in a particular genre. Like I think POD was in nu metal, and then I also think, honestly, Family Force 5 was within the crunkcore world. But as a genre, like a multiple artists in one particular genre, it's unbelievable how successful Solid State was for 10 years. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And the irony of it is that it's the most unchristian sounding music possible.
That to me is the hilarious thing about it.
So cool.
That's
probably why it was so attractive. And then once it became kind of like the standard or the norm or the expected from Christian alternative, well, then all of a sudden it's no longer the hip thing,
It is something else. All right, should we move on to top left?
Top left, yeah.
That's right. All right.
90s tooth and nail solid state bands.
I'm trying to remember what this
one's
the political compass. Like, what's the top left in the political compass? It's like the libertarian, but like the authoritarian ones, right?
Authoritarian left, so it'd be like Stalinish.
Right. Yeah. All right. So we're in the Marxist world now, or at least the Stalin world.
See, Becoming the Archetype should be over there. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. All right, so number 1 seed, undoubtedly, like this totally makes sense. MXPX versus number 16 seed Strong Arm. Pretty dominating 1 versus 16 right here. MXPX pretty much dominates Strong Arm. Although Strong Arm does have a pretty dedicated following, but
very cult following.
It is hard to beat MXPX in something like this. This is pretty typical. I wasn't overly surprised by this one.
Yeah, MXPX made the Final Four of the big CCM tournament I did with bands of all genres and labels. So I pretty much expected them to do really well.
Understandably so.
All right, so MXPX moves on to second round.
Yep.
Next one, Goaty Hook versus Stretch Armstrong, 8 versus 9 seed. This is one that, again, like two 90s bands that I didn't really grow up listening to. Cullen, you like Goaty Hook, right?
I did like Goaty Hook. I had all the Goaty Hook albums. Yeah. Definitely listened to a lot of Goaty Hook. Dig it.
Which is sort of surprising because like you're not
good stuff.
typically like that's not your typical genre of music, right?
No, that's not my go-to. I'm not like a huge punk fan by any means. But I don't know. They had a little something extra special. I felt like
Right.
that. Yeah, it drew me to it.
Yeah, and Goaty Hook wins pretty convincingly. I mean, 59 versus 40, 41%.
I thought Stretch Armstrong would win because when they play Furnace
I
Fest,
did
you would
too.
think it's the Rolling Stones. About
Right,
to play
exactly.
lines for merch, a mile long and things like that.
If we're talking about cult followings, Stretch Armstrong is by far they're in like the Mount Rushmore on this list of terms of like cult.
But their cult is so small.
Their cult is just too small. Exactly. Yeah.
It's like the not the Branch Davidian. What's the one that all wore Adidas things and
I think that was Korn.
Jesus Christ. All right, moving on. All right, next one. Starflyer 59 versus Extol. This is especially for Cullen, this is a devastating matchup. This is almost as bad as Norma Jean versus the Chariot. But I am shocked. This is one of the ones where I could have seen either one of these artists winning. What I'm shocked by is how much Starflyer 59 won.
Yeah.
This 80% to 20% for Extol. Extol, I think, really does have a cult following. I mean, there are a lot of metal artists that we talk to, especially those who grew up in the Tooth and Nail solid state world, that they talk about Extol religiously as a huge influence on them. So I thought Extol would at least put up a fight. They didn't even put up a fight.
Yeah, that blows my mind, especially since like just like listening to the Furnace Fest folks who were trying to get the ear of the organizers. The one artist that they just continuously pounded for was Extol, and Starflyer 59 was nowhere to be heard. Except I did say we should get Starflyer 59 there as well. But that blows my mind that it was that big of a disparity, because I mean they're legendary.
Mm-hmm.
Not just in like the Christian world, but like elsewhere as well.
I mean, they really, we were just talking about like influential Christian artists in particular genres. I mean, Starflyer was really early in that shoegaze era in the 90s. I mean, I wouldn't say that they were the originators of shoegaze. I wouldn't even say that they were like the most like popular artists in that 90s shoegaze world, but they were in it. And that at least counts for something as a Tooth and Nail artist, especially when Tooth and Nail first started as a label. It's pretty impressive what they were able to do very early on. I mean, yeah, granted, they are a massive band, have that cult following and everything, but the fact that they beat Extol that much just shocks me.
Yeah.
I feel like the Starflyer 59 fan base just keeps getting stronger and bigger for no, explicable reason, really. Like
it's because he just keeps making better and better music.
So
every
good.
single album he comes out with is better than the last, and
he's-
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, he's one of my
Unbelievable artist.
top 10.
Yeah.
All right, so Starflyer moves on. Next one, Zayao versus Danielson Family. This was one, again, like Zayao, I was expecting to win, but I thought maybe Danielson Family would at least put up a little bit of fight, but maybe their followers are like not on Twitter. Like I could see their followers like not having any social media, like they don't even have smartphones. Like these are Danielson Family fans are like the people who still have flip phones, and so I feel like this is a little unfair. Even though I think Zayao would have won regardless, I think it's a little unfair to Danielson Family given the nature of who their kind of fans are.
I was gonna say that I'm surprised Danielson Family Band put up 23%. Like that That's a pretty good fight
Did
against Zayo.
did Sufjan Stevens like repost you to even get to the 23%? Is that what happened there, Eric?
No, that didn't happen. I didn't know what they would do because I mean, like Pitchfork has always praised their albums and things like that, but I didn't know.
Which is
Yeah,
hilarious. That is so funny to me. That is so funny
Hey,
to me.
we've had him on, Dan Smith on, and he's great.
Yeah.
He's wonderful.
Oh, he was a blast.
He was a blast.
Yeah.
But it's hilarious that they would even put up this much of a fight versus Zayo. Honestly, I would have thought maybe Zayo would have been like a. Well, I see Blindside on here. I could have seen them as like a 2 or 3 seed, but again, like I'm just being nitpicky there. But Zayo, every time we've posted them for an episode, I mean, and they're the nicest guys. Dan and I'm always forgetting their drummer's name. But
Dan White.
Oh.
well, Dan's the singer, but who's their drummer that we always interview?
Yeah, why is my mind blank?
Anyway,
Was
nicest
Jesse
people. I
Smith?
feel no,
What's that?
no, that's not it. But their drummer, nicest
think about
guys,
it.
nicest guys. I feel bad.
That's
Like we
gonna
were talking
drive
about
me
how
mad.
nice they are, and it also it's like I don't remember their names, but anyway. All right, so Zayo wins pretty convincingly over Danielson family. They will be competing against Starflyer 59. That is a hell of a 90s matchup right there. That is
Yeah.
two very different genres and two very different cult followings that are absolutely going to despise each other. I love that. All right, so next one, Slick Shoes versus Bleach. Honestly, I didn't really listen to either one of these bands so much. The only reason why I picked Bleach, honestly, was Steel Roots had a like they had this song from Bleach that was, and I can never find it. I've literally looked through every song on Bleach on Spotify. They had a song that Steel Roots used that I, to this day, remember thinking to myself, that is one of the coolest, catchiest things I've ever heard, and never was able to actually find it. Because
Yeah, they used
during
it-
the Steel
used
Roots
it-
era, like it was like you had pure volume and that was it. Like this was even before you could search songs on YouTube. So I still have not found this song. So if anybody out there happens to be listening and also knew of a Bleach song that was being used on Steel Roots for like some sort of like commercial or like kind of like
It was
next
their bump-
programming
it was-
kind of
it
thing,
was-
let me
it was
know.
bumper music. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It was bumper music. And it was, I know exactly what you're talking about, but I've never been able to find it either. And I'm almost wondering if it was like a one-off thing that they did
Maybe.
for Steel Roots.
Totally.
I don't know.
It totally
I don't
could
know.
have. But Bleach barely
I
beats...
can't believe that Bleach won. I can't believe they won.
Really? Do you like Slick
I
Shoes that
really-
much more?
No, I don't have like a strong affinity for either of these bands, but the fact that Slick Shoes, I hear Slick Shoes mentioned all the time from the community. I don't ever hear Bleach discussed, almost ever, and so that's where I'm surprised that there was enough support for Bleach to come out and win that one.
I actually get a lot of comments about Bleach, and that's
that's
I'm
weird,
not really
man.
surprised that they won. I didn't know how much a residual effect MXPX fans would have on Slick Shoes, so I kind of gave them a little bit of a higher seed based on that.
That makes sense. All right, so Bleach moves on and will be competing against either the Juliana Theory or 90-Pound Wuss. And Juliana Theory pretty convincingly wins here, 79 to 21%. It's pretty big. I really do like Juliana Theory much more than 90-Pound Wuss. As much as 90-Pound Wuss like was one of those early punk tooth and nail bands, I think Juliana Theory just had like such an interesting indie alternative sound at that time, and I'm really glad that they won.
Yeah.
I'll just put it that way.
I am too. I think 90-Pound Wuss was they were a part of that early 90s punk sound that wasn't very refined, and I think that kind of hurts them in the long run.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I think the Juliana Theory are just more in my wheelhouse of what I enjoy.
Yeah, for sure, man.
All right, so Juliana Theory will be competing against Bleach in the next round. We will move on to the next matchup, which is Stavesacre versus Dogwood. This was tough because I love Josh from Dogwood, and I also love Mark from Stavesacre. And ultimately, I think it was just because I like Stavesacre's music more than Dogwood, I ended up voting Stavesacre. But Dogwood, I just have a soft spot in my heart for Josh and Dogwood. And anyway, two bands I love, and it's hard to pick one over the other.
Yeah, I like them both for completely different reasons. Like if I want to listen to Dogwood, I'm in like a happy-go-lucky mood. If I want to listen to Stavesaker, I want to think. So it's like two opposite ends of the coin, and I wouldn't have been able to pick one of these. But I probably would have ended up with Stavesaker in the end, just because I listen to them more often.
Stavesaker are the band that made me aware of Tooth and Nail Records. So I've got
Wow.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I used to listen to ChristianRock.net when I first got the internet, and Keep Waiting came on. I was like, oh yeah, that's a jam. And
How long did
Yeah, I
it
was
take
just
for
about to
that
say,
song
how long
load?
did dial-up take for that song to be able to buffer?
oh it was the old days, so it took a while. That was my version of streaming. I would request whatever song I wanted to hear, and it eventually come around.
All right, so Stavesaker wins pretty convincingly over Dogwood. That's a tough matchup, though, for Dogwood. All right, last one in this region. Blindside versus the Huntingtons. This one, 100% for me, Blindside. I'm also, like, not surprised at all how much Blindside won by.
You know what's really funny about this one? Just the personal anecdote. Blindside is on my Mount Rushmore of bands. I would die for them. But I never had a Blindside poster in my room. I had a Huntington's poster in my room.
What? No,
Yeah,
you didn't.
I totally
No,
did.
you didn't.
I
Do
totally
you still have
did.
that poster?
I don't know if I do. It's probably like a bookmark in some book somewhere in my closet here, but yeah.
How is it? I
I
didn't
got it.
even know you even knew of them. Not much like
Yeah.
let's listen to them. I didn't even know that you knew of them. That's hilarious.
I
To
had
me.
gone to youth group with my sister one time when she used to go to a place called U-Turn in Watertown. And they would like give out free CDs. So like I got free CDs all the time. The Huntingtons was one. Goaty Hook was one. Further Seems Forever was one. Let me think who else. There was a Me Without You album, or it was actually like a three CD or 3-song CD for some reason. I don't know what that was.
Some
Maybe it's
weird
just like a
clip.
sampler of some kind. And then like Casting Crowns and stuff like that. But like it was I loved going to youth group with my sister because I would get free music. I would just screw off the rest of the time and then just try to like go grab the music in the back and then head out as soon as I could. But yeah, the Huntingtons not very
Well,
cool,
let's just put it this way: you have not stage dove to the Huntingtons, but you have to Blindside.
That's true. That's true.
The
Yes.
Huntingtons.
Eric, were you at the Blindside show at Furnace Fest?
Oh yeah, I was there.
All right, so
Killer.
you saw a 230-pound man leaping across the
Oh,
stage.
how dare you! 230.
How much are you?
Come on. 215.
215. Did you see a 215-pound man leaping across the stage?
I don't recall, but I'm sure I did.
I did too, and it was great. And I also like had probably like 6 glasses of wine during the main lean set. So by the time Blindside played, I was so drunk, and I stage dove, and then didn't have like I didn't have my glasses on because like there's this guy who was like also super drunk. I was like, hold my glasses, jump and stage dive, and then you get like kind of put in that like between the barricade. There was like that space between the barricade and the stage in the shed, and then I just like ran out and then sprinted around the stage and then like ran up backstage and everything. But anyway, that was a good time.
Got lost, got chased down by police officers.
Yeah,
Wow.
probably the whole thing. All right, so Blindside moves on. They will match up against Stavesaker here in the next round. All right, last region before we get into the second round. First matchup: Amberlin versus Spoken. I cannot believe Spoken was number 16. Spoken has like a good amount of Spotify listeners, right?
Yeah, 121,000, I think.
Yeah. Why
Wow.
16 seed for
What?
Spoken?
What?
Are you saying they should have been higher, or
I think they
not
should
at
have been
all?
way higher.
A lot of the other bands in that region have similar numbers.
Really?
Yeah, I even had to leave some out with like Sent by Ravens had almost 100,000.
Which
my
that
listeners.
yes,
Really?
that blows my mind too, right? Like that's a band they had like what, maybe one, maybe two albums on
Yeah,
Tooth and Nail?
two albums I think is all they had.
Oh my goodness.
So I mean, there was Secret and Whisper was another one that I kind of had that could have went there. Yeah, Spoken went. They got there because of the streaming numbers, but like I couldn't put them ahead of bands like Further Seems Forever or
Right.
Yeah, no doubt.
who have less streaming numbers.
Yeah. But Spoken is one of those bands. Again, they're kind of in that, like, they weren't, I wouldn't say they were exactly butt rock, but they kind of they flirted with it. We'll just put it that way.
They were exactly like Collide era Skillet.
Yes. And they
Um,
got big because of that era. And again, it's one of those bands where had they been on any other label, I don't know if they would have gotten super big, but the fact that they had that sound allowed them a lot of success, clearly.
mhm.
Yeah, and they kept going for a long time too, which I'm sure contributes to their numbers.
Yeah. I cannot stand Spoken.
I
They played at Lifelight one time, and my buddy that I was with like pulled me over there. He's like, "You got to see these guys." I was like, "These guys suck. I'm out."
I think they were from like Kansas or something, but they had that one music video for the song was called Promise, and it was like in a tractor and like a cornfield, and like that was the whole like music video, and I was like, South Dakota. Even though they were from Kansas.
I liked a lot of their early stuff. They put one of their first albums before Tooth and Nail was like a new metal worship album, which was in '99 was kind of it was pretty unique, I thought.
Could you imagine like Brian
that's
Head Welch like playing like Good Father or something? All right. All right, so next matchup, Further Seems Forever versus Family Force 5. 8 versus 9 seed. I'm actually shocked that both of these artists are this low. Now, granted, I get that Further Seems Forever has probably way less streaming numbers than Family Force 5, but honestly, we all know that Further Seems Forever has a huge cult following in the Tooth and Nail world. I'm shocked that they aren't like a 3 or 4 seed at least. And then also like Family Force 5, I feel like was really like, I think they were actually kind of underrated in that Tooth and Nail scene. Like, I wasn't a big fan, but I could see a lot of people loving them. And so the fact that they're a 9 seed really actually surprises me, both of these. So anyway, this is a tough matchup. And at the end of the day, fortunately, Further Seems Forever wins out. Also, did I forget to mention that Amberlin won the last round?
Yeah, we didn't say
Yeah,
that,
sorry.
but I think it
Amberlin
was,
won the last
I
round
think it
against
was-
Spoken. Now you know. All right, so at the very least, we know Amberlin's going to be moving on. The great band. We'll talk about them more in the next round. But Further Seems Forever versus Family Force 5. I'm really shocked by that, honestly. That would even be the matchup. But Further Seems Forever kind of barely squeaks it out here.
Further Seems Forever have not done well in my polls, and that's kind of contributed to them being an 8. I feel like it's starting to look like they have more vocal fans than actual number of fans who follow me on Twitter, because a couple of other tournaments I seeded them higher than I should have, and they got like blown out by Sanctus Real. So that kind of
That's not a good look, Family Force 5.
No, Further Seems Forever is who I'm talking about. Got blown out by Sanctus
Oh, sorry.
Real.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why they're there on 8.
I just like that this one was like Sad Boys versus Party Boys.
It's true. It's just like
that just makes me chuckle.
It's
a
like
bit.
it's like Kesha versus Phoebe Bridgers or something.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
All right.
Analogy.
So Further Seems Forever moves on. Fortunately, I really like Further Seems Forever a lot, so I'm really glad that they ended up moving on. Although, like I said before, I do think Family Force 5 was actually really influential in the crunkcore scene. Now, granted, that's like being influential in a genre that like isn't particularly all that great. It's like, it's like Nickelback being like, "Oh, we're the butt rock band." It's like, okay, great, like you're a big band, but like you're the butt rock band. So, granted, Family Force 5's in that world, but it was something. It's at least like a Christian band, like influencing something, I guess. So, but Family
Yeah.
Force 5 moves on. Next one, Emery versus Icon for Hire. I'm not like I haven't really listened to Icon for Hire really at all. I kind of like again, they to me feel like one of those like butt rock bands that got really big just because of that sound. But I wasn't honestly expecting Emery to win this handedly versus them. Honestly.
I think Emery's following is just so strong, and it maintains its strength for a multitude of reasons.
I get
but,
that, and I probably
yeah, that doesn't
expected
surprise
Emery
me.
to win, but by almost like 90% to 10% essentially, that's pretty impressive.
It's just hard to make sense of a band with 687,000 monthly listeners getting 11% of the vote against a band with
Is that one of the in terms of
how many?
687,000 monthly listeners?
I'm telling you, Cullen,
What?
you make that kind of sound and you will get that many listeners. I'm telling you.
Oh my
It's a
God!
thing.
I'm starting a butt rock band. Guys. Let's do it.
You wonder why people do it. That or country. Do one of those two bands and you will find success.
Let's do butt rock country.
There you go.
There you go.
But it is that's got to be what was the other one that on the other side of the bracket that we were talking about that was like As Cities Burn Over Fit for a King was probably one of
Yeah.
the bigger like monthly listener kind of upsets.
Mhm.
This has got to be one of the bigger ones too, right?
Yeah, Emery had
Maybe 100,000.
178,000. 178,000.
Oh, so almost 200,000. Okay,
Yeah.
but still like not quite as big as the As Cities Burn Over Fit for a King, but still that's a pretty significant upset over a band that has 600,000 monthly listeners.
Especially
That's 6
89
times
to
bigger.
11.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially that big. That's pretty significant. But all right, well, Emery moves on, and they will be matching up either against the Almost versus Showbread, which this was a tough one for me. I really like both bands equally.
This one makes me mad. This one makes me very mad.
I like both bands equally, and honestly, the fact that Showbread was that low was a little surprising because again, I think they have really a dedicated following in the or in the Tooth and Nail world. But at the end of the day, the Almost beats them out. Any thoughts around that that matchup? That's interesting.
I think it's the Gillespie factor. I think he just carries.
Yeah,
You know,
maybe.
That was another one with big streaming disparity. Showbread
yeah.
Showbread less than 9,000 monthly listeners. That blew my mind.
What? Less than 9,000?
Really that little? I wouldn't have guessed that.
To the Almost 197,000.
Less than 9,000. That's got to
The
be one of
Almost
the
has
least on the
200,000.
entire list.
The Almost has almost 200,000 monthly listeners.
Yeah, that first single they had was like a top 10 modern rock mainstream hit.
I mean, I used to see it on like MTV, and of course, like Showbread's not on that. But I thought like Showbread would have like some sort of carryover with dedication from their fan base, but it clearly not.
That's one of the biggest surprises in streaming numbers for me was Showbread's such small numbers.
Wow. But I mean, they're playing at Furnace Fest again this year, and people go.
Yep.
I mean, they played a couple years ago. People go all out for Showbread.
Mhm.
Cullen, are you that much more of a Showbread fan than the Almost?
Man, I'm not a fan of the show of the Almost. at all.
Really? I mean,
Not
the
at all.
first album I love, and I probably love it more than any other Showbread album. But as an artist as a whole, I probably am a Showbread fan. And I forget who I ended up voting for on this one, but it was pretty close. But I can't believe that there was that much of a disparity between streaming numbers.
Yeah, it's surprising to
Again,
me
very
too.
close though.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant one. All right, so the Almost moves on though. They prevail. Next one, Copeland versus King's Kaleidoscope. It's hard to believe that some of these worship bands got so big on Tooth and Nail, but King's Kaleidoscope was one of them. Even though they said the F word every now and then. But Copeland, to me, Copeland is one of those bands that is severely underrated in the Tooth and Nail world. As an indie emo band, I think they influenced that world, and they were a part of that indie emo world for a while. And I think more people know about them than they realize. And I think Further Seems Forever is kind of in that same vein too. But I can't believe that Copeland didn't get as big as they should have. They are one of the bands on this where it feels like they were severely underrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great songwriters. I would have voted for King's Kaleidoscope here.
Really?
Yeah, they're one of the few kind of like worshipy artists that I actually do listen to every once in a
I
while.
I can't believe you like them more than Copeland though. I love Copeland. I think Copeland's
I know you do.
incredible.
I know you do.
I think Copeland. I think their problem with not being nearly as big as they should is they're too emo for the pitchfork crowd, but too indie
Too
artsy for
poppy.
the emo crowd. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
in that kind of weird world, but they released an album a couple years ago that was one of my favorite albums. Was that 2018, 2019 or something? But I think Aaron Marsh is an incredible songwriter. I think he's an incredible artist, and I think Copeland is just severely underrated.
I agree.
Yeah. This
All
next
right.
one's gonna be fun, Mason. This is one of your favorite bands on this next one.
Obviously, again, Copeland moves on. It was fairly close, but Copeland moves on. All right. 1,000-Foot Crush versus FM Static. This almost feels like a Chariot versus Norman Jean kind of matchup, but
Yeah.
for my least favorites.
For 9-year-old Mason.
Yes, this is. If you would have asked me this question almost 20 years ago, this would have been the hardest pick for me. But the biggest thing was it was 20 years ago. Honestly, though, it's hard to believe that 1,000-Foot Crutch has the following that they do. I mean, how many monthly listeners do they have, Eric? Probably close to 1 million.
3.4 million.
3.4 million for 1,000-Foot Crutch Color.
Yeah.
And how much does FM Static have?
804,000.
FM Static has almost 900,000 monthly listeners. FM Static.
Correct.
And these are both Trevor McClanahan bands.
Yeah.
He is by far the most listened to Tooth and Nail artist ever. And it's not even close. And
Yeah.
it blows my mind how popular he was. But neither one of these bands, I think, are they have the dedicated Tooth and Nail following. They were big outside of Tooth and Nail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
TFK have the most monthly listeners of any band in the tournament. By far.
More than Jeremy Camp and
Jeremy
wow.
Jeremy Camp's got 1.7 million.
And yet you had 1,000-Foot Crutch at number 3. That's interesting.
I had them at 2, but after talking to someone, I was talked down, but I felt like I couldn't move them very far down, so I just moved them from 2 to 3.
Wow. So the band that has the most Spotify listeners currently is number 3 in the tournament. That's something else. But
that is something
they
else.
ended up actually dominating FM Static. You know what would be interesting is to hear Trevor's opinion on this. If he had to vote between the two, would he vote TFK over FM Static?
What do you think you would say, Eric?
I think it'd say TFK because FM Static is probably only as popular as they are because of his name
Of
from
TFK.
TFK.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, that's true. All right, well, TFK ends up prevailing, and they will be facing off Copeland in the next round. All right, last one of the second round. Or sorry, second to last.
Not quite.
May versus the Classic Crime. These are two bands that were somewhat similar in sound. It was pretty close.
Classic Crime was a little heavier, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a tough matchup. I love May, so I ended up voting for May. Any thoughts on this matchup?
I probably personally would have gone Classic Crime.
Really?
Is it McDonald, right?
Yeah, Matt
Is that his
McDonald.
name?
Yeah.
Matt, yeah. I really dig Matt McDonald's voice, and I think that he's actually probably the most talented singer other than Christian Lindskog on this entire list.
Wow. Even more so than Mark from
Yeah, well, there's Skylar Kroom as well.
That's true. And Mark from
his-
you really like Mark
I
from
think-
Stave Saker too.
I do like Mark as well, but I think that Matt McDonald's a better singer all around.
Wow.
than
Interesting. All
than
right.
Mark even. Yeah.
I like the Classic Crime, but May are top 5 band for me. So
Yeah.
Oh, hey, there you go.
May's
easy,
great.
Easy for you.
yeah,
Easy for you. What's your May album?
the Everglow easily.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
I mean, and honestly, if it weren't for Everglow, probably Classic Crime might move on. But Everglow is such especially among Tooth and Nail fans during that era, is one of the. I mean, Everglow, like Define the Great Line, some of those other albums from that mid 2000s era are considered some of the classic Tooth and Nail albums, and so obviously I think May, just by that alone, probably ends up moving on.
Yeah.
I've
So,
noticed from my tweets that the Everglow is one of the most like beloved albums of that scene. Easy.
Totally. Well, May moves on, probably because of the Everglow, and they will be matching up against either Me Without You or The Fold. Here's what's funny though, Cullen. Your shit's about to is it shit's bricked or whatever? What is it called? Your mind's
Sure.
about to be blown. Let's put it that way. All right.
My shit's about to be bricked.
Me Without You versus The Fold. How many more monthly listeners does The Fold have than Me Without You, Eric? You probably found this out.
Oh, can I guess? I'm gonna say it's 9.5 times more.
That many? Okay.
Not quite that
Not
much.
quite.
The Fold
Okay.
the Fold have 339,000 monthly listeners to Me Without You's 154,000.
I didn't know Me Without You was that high.
Yeah.
Actually, I went to guess that.
It is pretty dedicated, but The Fold is a band that here's what's funny, that out of almost most of these bands, The Fold is a band that got all of those listeners after they left the Tooth and Nail world, and they started doing what's the like Power Ranger? It wasn't Power Ranger.
That is like Lego.
It's Legos. Yeah,
songs.
they made
Yeah.
all these songs for Legos and got huge because they were making songs for Legos.
Yeah.
That Legos crowd, man, you gotta get in their
It's
pockets.
unbelievable. So the fact that they even got to number 12 almost probably honestly, if it weren't for the Legos thing, do you think they would have even been in the tournament, Eric?
No, probably not.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like streaming numbers alone because of Legos. But if you look at the streaming numbers of their Tooth and Nail albums, I think they had like 2 or 3. There's no way they would have probably even been in the tournament. But the fact that they were a Tooth and Nail band at one point and they got huge because of Legos puts them up there. But honestly, unless you had a bunch of like 10-year-olds voting on this Twitter poll, Me Without You, I think, was undoubtedly going to win. And so Me Without You very handedly wins this matchup against The Fold, rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you go, Eric. You know now that you need to go out and try to find that 10-year-old demographic to get them engaged, you know.
All right, so we're now moving on to round 2. It's going to be a lot shorter now, fortunately. All right, so because we're already at an hour and a half of recording. I knew this was going to take a while because that's what happens. All right, so we're going to go back up top right. Seventh Day Slumber, who ended up upsetting Jeremy Camp, versus Falling Up. Eric, what did you think of this matchup?
It was just another one where I was hoping Falling Up would get the win, but after Seventh Day Slumber beat Jeremy Camp, I didn't really expect it. But
yeah, so Falling Up ends up beating Seventh Day Slumber in a pretty close one. It was a nail biter, but they end up beating them. Again, I think it's one of those things where it doesn't make sense to me how Seventh Day Slumber ends up beating Jeremy Camp, but then doesn't end up beating Falling Up. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let's ask this question: why is Seventh Day Slumber putting up a fight here? Because I simply don't understand this one.
That's a good question. They have like 86,000 monthly listeners. But yeah, I can't explain how they would beat Jeremy Camp at all.
Like, am I missing something with like their live shows or something like that maybe like didn't resonate with me but resonate with someone else? Or because like their songs are just okay at the very best.
Yeah, maybe it's where they're just a real outspoken Christian testimony driven kind of band. I like probably Skillet fans are probably Seventh Day Slumber fans.
Yeah, when Skillet fans want to chill out for a little bit, they go listen to some Seventh Day Slumber and say, you know what, whatever, let's move on.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. I think that Falling Up is significantly a better artist all the way around the board.
Yeah,
catchier, more energetic,
more creative,
just more creative. Yeah.
100%.
Totally. Well, that one's not too much of a surprise to me. I don't think it's probably a surprise to you guys either. Next one, Mace.
All right, so next one, Disciple versus Hawk Nelson. This does feel like it should be a really close one, right?
It does, yeah.
I feel like the fan bases are just as dedicated. They probably have somewhat similar kind of size of fan bases. This one, I think I probably voted for Hawk Nelson, but I really had no idea where this one was going. Any thoughts on this one?
Disciples singer and followed me on Twitter right as I'd
Oh,
released
that's right.
this, so he was ready to pounce. So him and the Disciple,
he was chiming in.
yeah,
Huh?
him and the Disciple Twitter were both retweeting every round, so that helped them out quite a bit, I'm sure.
Well,
Nice.
Disciple ends up winning, and so they're going to be matching up against Falling Up in the Sweet 16. Next one, Project 86 versus Cutlass. Again, a matchup that feels like it should be close, given the fact that Cutlass is huge, and Project 86 probably doesn't have quite as big of a fan base, but has a very dedicated one. It felt like this one should be really close.
I knew that Cutlass was popular because my uncle, who was like the leader of our local Promise Keepers, that was like his favorite band, and I was like, yeah, that's so not cool, man. But I didn't think that Project 86 was going to win this big.
It's pretty
pretty
marginal. Yeah, 65% to 35% over Cutlass.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Which
surprising.
again, I think it's that theme of Cutlass probably was one of those bands that even though they were on Tooth and Nail, their fan base was outside of the Tooth and Nail world.
Yeah, well, they had a
And
gold record.
I do think that affects this draft.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a gold record, and it was their worship album. So that kind of tells you kind of the crowd that they were.
What was
really
that big
drawing.
song, Strong Tower? I feel
Strong
like
Tower,
we
yeah.
worship to
Yeah.
that all the time in youth group.
Yeah. Well, we got ghosted by Gutless. Remember that, Mason?
Did we? Oh, that's right. We did get ghosted by them. That's right. All right.
Yeah.
Well, glad Project
Those
86
jerks.
moved on. All right. So Project 86 moves on. Plank Eye versus the Supertones. Who's going to match up against Project 86? This one I felt like should have been closer, but pretty convincingly, the OC Supertones wins.
The ska is strong.
I was gonna say
Clearly.
the fact that they're like the only ska band on here, I think only helps them because so many people have such a strong connection with that ska phenomenon that there was, that they're gonna move on because they are so much different than everyone
Right.
else.
It is interesting that we have like, third, fourth waves of emo now, and we have yet to have a second wave of ska that I know of.
Yeah, that is true.
Was ska so weird that it's too weird to like have another wave of it?
I tweeted out the other day, I said, clearly people are ready for a ska revival because the ska bands just dominate in my tournaments. And
Yeah.
somebody sent me like a Brooklyn vegan article saying, 20 ska bands are out now. But it's like, for some reason, it's not becoming a thing again. It doesn't seem like.
It's so weird. Because
Yeah.
Five Iron won your CCM one, right?
Yeah.
So weird.
People are tweeting.
I think this has to be. Go ahead.
I was going to say, people are tweeting me asking me to do tournaments with a no ska band rule because they feel like it's unfair to everybody else, which is ridiculous considering it's a genre that hasn't been popular in 25 years.
So
I feel like this is one that has to be a victim to nostalgia. Like that's the only reason I can imagine people and like really wanting to listen to ska is because it's nostalgia.
Very well likely. It's just I never really understood it, and never,
especially the Supertones version of ska, right? I mean, like Five Iron Frenzy, you have like very like pointed like political messages and things like that, and like existential questioning and all that stuff. But like with Supertones, you don't really have that. So that's where I think it's got to be just nostalgia.
It must be. It's really bizarre. But also, again, like Supertones were one of, outside of maybe MXPX, they were one of those early bands that were on Tooth and Nail that were probably funding everybody else's albums.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, true.
I mean, they were that big at that time. It's really interesting how big they got. But all right, well, Supertones end up prevailing over Plank Eye. Goodbye, Plank Eye. All right, next one. Did you get my little like good eye plank guy?
did.
That was fun.
That was wonderful.
Great. All right, so Under Oath versus Haste the Day. This one was pretty handedly, but again, I thought maybe there would be a little bit more of a fight from Haste the Day.
Yeah, I'm not surprised there wasn't. When you're going against Under Oath, I mean, it is. I mean, that's the juggernaut in the room. So
That is true. But I thought maybe a little bit more of a fight. Like I thought maybe like 65-35 kind of thing, but nope, 81-19. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I would have thought a little more fight from Haste the Day fans.
Clearly not. Even the Haste Today fans were like, nope, Under Oath. They need to get through.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the problem with this solid state section, the solid state region, is that the bands are so similar that you're not going to get massive or like super close fights. I don't think, just because
If you were a Haste Today fan, you were also an Under Oath fan, and
you were also an
Right.
Under Oath fan. So, but when you're going against Under Oath is going to win out every single
Right.
time because everyone knows 10 Under Oath songs by heart.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. Versus like if you were a Starflyer fan over Extol fan, like those are two very different fan bases.
Very
Right.
different. Yeah.
All right. Well, Under Oath very convincingly moves on to the Sweet 16. As Cities Burn versus Demon Hunter. Again,
This
a
one
very
kinda
like big
angered me.
matchup in terms of Spotify numbers, but Demon Hunter ends up prevailing.
Apparently, Megacore is very strong within the Christian world.
Like I said, I've learned that Demon Hunter is a gateway band for a lot of people, so people get attached to those kinds of artists.
That's right.
Might also be a gateway to some very interesting politics that I think should probably be done with.
Possibly.
Cullen, you got to be nice because I literally texted Ryan Clark the other day.
Hey, I have no problems with Ryan Clark. I have no problems at all. I'm just saying, like it's.
I haven't gotten a response back, but I did get his number so we could interview training for Utopia, but haven't heard back.
I would say the same. I would say the same thing to Seth Heckox from Becoming the Archetype.
Yeah, but Seth is like he's a goofball. He's just ridiculous to be around.
Oh, I think Ryan Clark.
He's probably one of those like serious artist people that like happens to have these interesting politics. But I doubt Ryan Clark is a goofball. Let's put it that way.
I wouldn't think so.
We'll see.
We'll find out. We'll find out. He doesn't strike me as a goofball. But all right. So I'm just realizing now you actually have the regions labeled.
Yeah.
I was like earlier.
Oh my
I was
gosh,
like,
Nate.
oh, why did you have that region that way or whatever? And I'm like, just now noticing this. All right. So Demon Hunter moves on. Now, Norma Jean versus August Burns Red. Probably one of the more difficult round of 32 matchups right here. I probably voted for Norma Jean, but my goodness, this is going to be way closer than I think people realize. Because August Burns Red's probably what, like 1 million monthly listeners?
847,000.
Yeah, close to, and then Norma Jean is at just under 200,000. So
Just
August
over.
Burns Red has 4 times more monthly listeners on Spotify, and yet pretty much makes it a 2-point game at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Very impressive. And again, I think that really shows that Norma Jean, just album for album, people are dedicated and love Norma Jean.
Yeah.
I do think like if Norma Jean has played Furnace Fest last year, they'll play again this year. If August Burns Red happened to be at Furnace Fest, I think they would probably have equal sized crowds. Let's just put it that way.
I can see that.
That's an interesting thought. I don't know. I think outside of like the Christian world, August Burns Red definitely pulls a lot more respect and probably fandom as well. So
I don't know I think they have a bigger fandom outside the Christian world. I don't know if they have more respect. I bet outlets like Metal Sucks probably likes Norma Jean more than August Burns Red.
Metal Sucks hates Norma Jean. Yeah.
Why? Outside of
I
Bless
don't
the
know.
Martyr, they hate Norma Jean?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
In
ridiculous.
fact, just
can't
about every single Christian adjacent artist, Metal Sucks hates.
Right. But
Yeah.
I would say out of all of the metalcore, even Norma Jean or Under Oath, sorry, I would say Norma Jean might be the most artsy metalcore artist I've ever heard. Even in
Oh,
outside of the like,
without a doubt.
they're
Without a
so
doubt.
artsy. I can't imagine that a outlet like Metal Sucks would hate Norma Jean, given how artsy they actually are. And it's not like they have success that seems unbridled. Like they have success that has like been very hard earned, and the very little success that they do have, they have worked their asses off for because they're damn good artists. I can't imagine any outlet being like anti Norma Jean.
Yeah, they have a lot of hate, and I think it would surprise you.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
all right. Well, August Burns Red barely ends up beating out Norma Jean. Norma Jean ends up going out in the second round. I feel like they should have at least deserved a Sweet 16 bid, but here they are out in the round of 32. Next one, Living Sacrifice versus Devil Wears Prada. This is our first extremely close one.
Yeah. Wow.
Again, it tells you everything you need to know about Living Sacrifice's fandom.
Yeah, this was another one.
What's the monthly listener difference here? Because this is a massive one, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. The Devil Wears Prada has almost 1.2 million monthly listeners to Living Sacrifices 20,000.
What is the difference between that?
So this has to be a cred thing. Like this has to be like this thing where like you have to pay respects to the OGs. Otherwise
that's 60 times larger.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was real surprised. Pleasantly.
It's like you literally got all 20,000 monthly listeners from Living Sacrifice and got them to vote for Living Sacrifice.
Well, what else is almost just as interesting is that they barely squeaked out of the first round, only to barely squeak out of the second round. Like that doesn't make any sense.
They're sort of like they're a 7 seed, so they're not a Cinderella, but like the fact that they're like winning these like close matchups, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they win 50.4, not 54, 50.4 over 49.6. So, I mean, that's like a matter of maybe 100 votes.
Yeah, if something.
I mean, that is close.
Yeah.
That is so close. That's unbelievable. But Living Sacrifice beating out Devil Wears Prada, that is a upset. That is 100% an upset.
Yeah.
And again, just shows you how dedicated the Living Sacrifice fandom is. All right, top left now to MXPX versus Goaty Hook. And MXPX wins pretty handedly over Goaty Hook, which makes sense because I think if you're one of those people that if you're a punk fan and that like 90s era for Tooth and Nail, even if you liked Goaty Hook more, you realize that like MXPX was on another level.
Yeah, they're more influential. They give you cred as a Christian kid, you know. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, MXPX saved Brandon Ebel's, he took that like $100,000 loan from his grandpa. Brandon Ebel would probably be in jail now if it weren't for MXPX.
Yeah.
Because he probably, or he would be filing for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It's similar to the Under Oath versus Haste of the Day situation. You know, how can you vote for artist that's obviously lesser, even if you like them more.
MXPX, another big band that will be at Furnace Fest. Cullen, you got a pizza ready?
I'll get my pizza ready.
Great, wonderful. All right, next one. Who will MXPX be going against? Starflyer, 59, or Zayao? This is oh my God, this is such a difficult matchup.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, this actually shocked me. Starflyer wins pretty convincingly over Zayao.
Yeah, that surprises me a lot as well. Starflyer apparently just does really, really well against real heavy bands.
Eric, was Starflyer in your CCM bracket?
No, they weren't.
Okay.
If it were up to my own preferences, they definitely would have been there. But I'll probably put them in the
had
next
they
one.
been, it would have been really curious, even though they're significantly smaller than a lot of other CCM bands. If they were in that bracket, it feels like at the very least, clearly there's enough votes that probably would have got them through maybe the second round even in the CCM bracket.
Yeah.
This is impressive how well they're going through this bracket right now.
Yeah, I'm going to put them in the next one. I'm going to do that big CCM one every year.
Cool. Yeah.
And
See how much
just see what it's
that's
like.
going to be interesting to see
Yeah.
how much it changes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, so Starflyer ends up beating Zayao. I don't know who I ended up voting for here. I like both bands pretty much equally, but I can't believe that there was this much of a discrepancy between the two, 61% versus 39% for Zayao.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. All right, so Starflyer will be against MXPX in the next round. Pretty tough matchup for Starflyer. All right, next one, Bleach versus the Juliana Theory. This is again this was a really, really close one. And also it feels like the fan bases for both of these bands are the same fan bases. I could be
Definitely.
wrong. I wasn't around in the 90s for Tooth and Nail to know this, but it feels like that.
Bleach actually didn't come on to Tooth and Nail until the 2000s, but I think most people think of them as a 90s band. So I went ahead and put
Really?
them
That's
in the
wild. I
90s.
never would have guessed that.
Yeah, they were a forefront band.
Huh. Interesting.
So I'm not sure that they would have been completely in the same crowd.
But Bleach barely wins over Juliana Theory, which I don't know. I don't know who I ended up voting. Probably Juliana Theory on this one, but oh my goodness, I cannot believe that it was that close. It's pretty impressive. So Bleach over Juliana Theory. Who will they be going against? Either Stavesacre or Blindside. I love you, Mark Solomon, but honestly, let's be honest. Blindside is an unbelievable band and deserves to be going on, and very much so. They won 68% versus 32% over Stavesacre. So Stavesacre doesn't get out of the second round. But any thoughts around Blindside beating Stavesacre other than it seems like that was pretty predictable? I guess maybe I don't know.
Pretty predictable. I hate to see Stavesacre go, but yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, two bands that I love. Hate to see either one go out, but
Right.
Blindside deserves it.
Yep. It makes
For
sense.
sure.
It makes sense why Blindside goes on. All right, so that is the second to last region. Last region of the second round, Amberlin, because remember, they ended up beating Spoken. Amberlin versus Further Seems Forever. I like both bands a lot, almost equally. I do think, if I remember right, I do believe I voted for Further Seems Forever on this one. But this does feel like you're really outmatched for Further Seems Forever because Amberlin is so big, and not just so big, but they also have a pretty dedicated fan base.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's another one. Probably two top 20 bands for me. So I hate to see either one go.
Great band, Amberlin. I mean, both bands have like put out consistently great albums. It's really hard. I mean, it just so happens that Amberlin kind of struck gold with a couple of their songs that ended up getting really big. And even outside of the Christian music world, I knew lots of people who knew Amberlin. Outside the Christian music world, other than like really weird like emo snobs, I guarantee you nobody knows who Further Seems Forever is. But a lot of people who know who Amberlin is.
Eric, real quick, did you vote on these yourself as well?
I didn't.
Was that hard?
Yeah, I try to stay unbiased. You know, they're obvious ones that people are going to know I'm pulling for. But yeah, I don't usually vote on them.
I bet Amberlin versus Further Seems Forever is also a big Spotify discrepancy because Further Seems Forever was maybe like 30,000 monthly listeners. I bet Amberlin's got to be over 1 million.
Yeah, Further Seems Forever is 47,000. Amberlin is 1.13 million.
Yeah, so almost like what is that? Like a 50 times big different. I mean, that's pretty significant. So Amberlin, I think, just like is going to win in that regard. All right, so next one. Who is Amberlin going to be facing against in the Sweet 16? Emery or The Almost? Two bands that actually, out of all these matchups, I think these are two bands that are like best friends with each other. Aaron Gillespie is super good friends with Emery. So it's kind of funny that those two ended up matching up against each other. But again, Emery pretty convincingly wins over The Almost. Again, it shows you like how dedicated Emery fans are. Even though I think Almost probably has, I think you said Almost has more monthly listeners than Emery, right?
Yeah, The Almost has about 20,000 more monthly listeners. Not a huge gap.
Not that much. Okay, so it's pretty close, but still, Emery wins pretty convincingly. Cullen, obviously, you're probably rooting for Emery here.
Yeah, definitely rooting for Emery. Did Matt Carter reach out at all on this?
No, I never heard from
We
him.
need
saw
to
anything.
bug him about that then.
Yeah, totally. He would absolutely love to throw that in Aaron's face.
Yeah, y'all will have to let
I
him know
know.
about it.
We will gladly
Yeah.
let Aaron know that not only is he getting beat out by Emery, but he's also the he's the fill-in for Daniel Davidson. All right, so moving on, Copeland versus TFK. Here is probably a big Spotify discrepancy here, right? Copeland's got what, like maybe 100,000 followers, monthly
119,000.
119,000. So just over 100,000 monthly listeners. And TFK, you said, is 3 million? Over 3 million?
3.4 million.
So what is that? Over
heavens.
almost like a 30 times difference. And Copeland, given the fact that it's a 30 times difference, actually keeps it fairly close here.
Pretty close, yeah. Pretty close.
That's pretty impressive. But TFK ends up pulling out 58% to 42%. That's pretty impressive for Copeland, honestly. That's a great showing.
Yeah.
That is.
Again, it goes to show that a band like Copeland versus TFK, it shows that like there is a dedicated Tooth and Nail fan base, and they have their favorite artists. And TFK, even though they might be massive, still does not have quite the pull that some of these smaller artists do, just because of who the fan base is. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so TFK ends up moving on to the Sweet 16. May versus Me Without You. I'm probably one of the biggest Me Without You fans out there, even though I love May. I love May. We're going to be interviewing them sometime this summer for Furnace Fest. Very excited for that, but you can't vote against Me Without You. I mean, I feel like, I think even Zach, who is the guitarist for May, even like when it was this matchup, he was like,
Mhm.
100% it's got to be Me Without You. Like, if you're voting for us over Me Without You, you're a bunch of dumbasses. And
Yeah.
that's a guy who's coming from the band May, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm
Great
a
band.
Yeah, makes sense.
The Spotify listeners are probably fairly similar, right?
yeah. Me Without You is 154,000. May is 80,000.
Okay, yeah. So like
Pretty similar.
similar-ish, but Me Without You again is such a dedicated fan base. I mean, they were one of those bands where those 150,000 people that are listening are going to be buying tickets and also getting albums and everything. I mean, they're that dedicated. So, all right, that rounds out the round of 32. Now we're going to Sweet 16, and we have, oh boy, here we go. All right, Falling Up versus Disciple. I feel like Falling Up is a better artist, but Disciple does have such a significant larger fan base
Yeah.
that it makes sense. Disciple ends up winning here, but Falling Up, they made it pretty far given the fact, like, what they have, like 20, 30,000 monthly listeners.
Let's see. Sorry. They have 62,000.
That much, okay. Well, the
Yeah.
fact that they're even under 100,000 monthly listeners and made it into the Sweet 16, that's pretty impressive for a band. So
Yeah.
I'm fairly impressed by how far Falling Up made it. But at some point, you do realize like the Disciple fan base is just going to make things happen.
Especially with them retweeting it.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that I forgot that the lead singer was involved in all this. So, all right. Well, Disciple ends up winning, not by that much, but they end up winning pretty decidedly. All right. So, who will they be competing against? Project 86 or the OC Supertones? Again, these feel like two very different fan bases. The Project 86 fan base does not feel like at all the OC Supertones fan base. So it's like two different fan bases competing against each other, and it's a pretty tight one here.
Yeah, it is. I think I would like to know, if you were to take the song Spy Hunter out of Project 86's discography, do they make it past the second round.
Yeah, what Eric, look at Spy Hunter's plays. Is it their most played song on Spotify? It's got to be, right?
It's actually not. Their most played
What?
their most played song is, I believe it's Evil from the album
Like Rival
after
Factions or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Rival Factions. Yeah.
Rival Factions. That surprises me. I think Spy Hunter might be the most perfect song created in the entire like Tooth and Nail discography.
I was
More than
wrong.
a Blindside song?
More than a Blindside song. I think it's a perfect song.
It's a damn good song. That guitar riff is
Yeah.
so good.
And I'm not like the biggest Project 86 fan by any means, but that song is it draws in so many different kinds of fans, whether you're a punk fan, rock fan, heavy metal fan, like it draws in everyone. It's catchy. It's got a
so
great
good.
riff. I'm surprised that that's not their most listened to. First of all, second
it's
of all,
their fourth.
that's their fourth most
Yeah.
listened to.
The hell?
What? Something's wrong.
Cullen, were we talking to somebody recently that they were talking about how what was the band? Oh, Linkin Park was opening for Project 86, or maybe that was some other
Yeah.
conversation.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
But at one point, Linkin Park, very very early on, even before what's that first album?
Hybrid
I
Theory.
can't believe I'm blanking on the name.
Hybrid Theory.
Hybrid
Theory. Yeah, before Hybrid Theory came out, they like literally months before. It was like POD and Project 86. Oh, you know who it was? I was talking with Seth Hetcox about this, and he was like, "Oh yeah, like they were on this like big tour, and it was Project 86, POD, and Linkin Park right before they released Hybrid Theory, and then Hybrid Theory came out, and it was like they got off the tour." And then ended up, doing their own tour because Hybrid Theory just became the biggest thing in the world at the time. But it's weird to think like Project 86 and even POD were in that world at one point. It's unbelievable.
That is weird. That is hard to believe.
All right, so Project 86
Wow.
ends up losing to OC Supertones, though, which is hard to like. Again, there's something about the whole like ska world, right?
Yeah.
Something about that ska world. It will take you over. So, all right, well, OC Supertones move on, and they will be competing against Disciple here in is that Elite 8? So now we move on to Underoath versus Demon Hunter. Honestly, I thought this would be closer because, again, I thought
too.
Demon Hunter has such a dedicated fan base, but Underoath ends up prevailing here.
Yeah, that surprises me a lot. A lot.
You thought Demon Hunter would actually beat Underoath here?
No, I thought Underoath wanted to win. I thought this was going to be like a nail biter down. Down to the last vote.
Yeah, it ended up being way more. It's hard to believe how many people were really that big of Underoath fans. It's hard to believe that scene was so centered around Underoath at one point.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. All right, well, so Underoath moves on, beats Demon Hunter. They will move on to the Elite 8. Now, August Burns Red versus Living Sacrifice. This one I thought would actually be closer, given how Living Sacrifice literally had just barely beaten Devil Wears Prada. I thought this would also be very close. But it turns out it wasn't that much of a close game. August Burns Red wins out pretty handedly.
Yeah, I think you have two pioneers of genres that were defining for the whole like scene overall. It doesn't surprise me that August Burns Red wins here, probably just because of the demographic that's on Twitter compared to Living Sacrifice. But it is impressive. It is impressive that they won by 61 to 39.
I mean, this is another big like Spotify discrepancy, right? So the fact that August Burns Red wins is like not that surprising, but also it's like Living Sacrifice moving into this position in the Sweet 16 is pretty impressive. So props to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so August Burns Red ends up moving on to the Elite 8. All right, moving up to the Elite 8 or the Sweet 16 bracket in the top left. All right, MXPX versus Starflyer. Oh, Cullen, I know where you're going with this, but
Yeah.
this is I still can't believe how much more MXPX is winning here.
I can. I mean,
They're dominating.
especially if you listen to like the people we've had on the podcast who are all in the scene, almost all of them. MXPX is by far the most discussed band as like an influential band to them. So I get why MXPX is winning. Starfly 59 is a multitudes more talented and better, but it is what it is, you know?
Unbelievable. Eric, any thoughts on that?
I wouldn't have been surprised if MXPX hadn't won by even more, just because
Really?
how well.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always do so well in my tournaments. So yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised if
get
it
them
was
on
like
the
80 to
podcast.
20.
Clearly, they're one of those bands that has not only a like they have popularity, but they're also like super dedicated fan base, which makes sense why they're headlining that one night of Furnace Fest. I mean, that'll probably be one of the bigger Furnace Fest shows, if not the biggest Furnace Fest show.
I think
Especially the
it'll be
fact that they
biggest
haven't
one.
played for so long together, it's going to be pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine how much Furnace Fest had to pay for them to show. That's actually that would be interesting. Is to like how these bands compare into how much these bands have to get paid in order to play. That would not just like how many tickets are they selling, but how much they are requiring venues to pay for them. That would be interesting.
I wish there was a resource.
I bet that actually is probably a better like a more accurate measurement than Spotify listeners.
I bet you're right.
Probably. Yeah.
All right. So MXPX moves on. Next one, Bleach, which somehow made it into the Sweet 16 versus Blindside. Again, pretty convincingly Blindside over Bleach. I don't think anybody's really surprised by this. Even probably Bleach fans are probably not surprised by this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Blindside's a juggernaut here. Again, it's one of those things too. It's a better band versus a not as good band, right? I mean,
here's something. The fact that Blindside's gotten this far. Here's something, Eric. Blindside only had one album that was actually solid state, right?
They had two.
Thought Crush Your Mind, and then they're self-titled.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they had two, but their big albums that made them famous were not Tooth and Nail albums, which is interesting.
That was with Elektra album.
So when you ended up making this bracket, how did you determine what actually qualifies as a Tooth and Nail band? Did you go into if they just release an album off of Tooth and Nail, then they're a Tooth and Nail band, or did they have to have Tooth and Nail albums that made them big?
They had to have released at least two albums on one of the Tooth and Nail labels.
So okay, so like POD technically is a Tooth and Nail band because they had like an EP on Tooth and Nail. They would have been a huge. I don't know how far they would have gotten, but they would have been a huge seed on this. Yeah. But they only released like an EP.
Yeah.
So, they weren't big. They didn't get big off of Tooth and Nail. So that's like that's the other thing that's really interesting.
Yeah, it would have felt weird having like POD as a 1 seed and making it to the Final Four based on releasing an EP on the label that the tournament's based on.
Totally.
Right.
Well, and ends up being Blindside versus MXPX. I'm very excited for that matchup next. All right. Last little region before we move on to the Elite 8. Amberlin versus Emory.
Yeah.
Again,
that's
like I feel like these are like two bands that like probably know each other pretty well. So this is a good matchup, but Amberlin ends up winning pretty handedly here too, 64-36.
Yeah. Yeah, a much bigger string of just better songs by Amberlin. It makes sense. I would have still voted for Emory, but
right. And I probably did too, if I remember right. But this is it's pretty impressive that Emory even got this far with what was it, 200,000 monthly listeners or whatever it is. It's pretty impressive. Again, Amberlin's probably close to 1 million, if not over 1 million, and so Emory is really fighting against just a massive fan base at this point.
Yeah.
And Amberlin, even though I think they really got big outside of the Tooth and Nail world, they still were sizable in the Tooth and Nail world. Like they had a large Tooth and Nail fan base, and so it makes sense ultimately
They
that they would beat
They
Emory.
they've got a lot of
they were
crossover. Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
no, go ahead. Sorry, no, you're good.
They've got a lot of like crossover appeal between not just like Christian and mainstream, but like they also, they have the tooth and nail crowd. They also have like the Switchfoot crowd. Would also be
Yeah,
Switchfoot fan or Amberlin fans.
yeah. They rode that rail so nicely where they're kind of drawing from again multiple different fan bases or genre fans,
Right.
I should say. Where they're poppy enough, they're hard rock enough, they're anthemic enough, where they can just pull from everywhere. That is a sound that is difficult to accomplish, and they did it
Mhm.
just about better than
Yeah,
anyone.
they're pretty incredible. I mean, they are one of those bands where if I ever mention like Tooth and Nail to people, if they don't know who Under Oath is, probably the next band that I mention of people my age is Amberlin because of
Mhm.
how much they were able to go outside that mainstream world. So, yeah, makes sense that Amberlin ends up winning here against Emory, but sad to see Emory go. But here we are. All right, so who is Amberlin going to be matched up against? It's going to be either TFK or Me Without You. And I felt like this was one of stay in line if you can stay in line kind of thing. Me Without You barely beats TFK, which again, I can't believe because TFK to me does not have the fan base within the tooth and nail world, but clearly they have enough where they can pull off enough votes against Me Without You. But there's a massive Spotify difference here too, right? Because Me Without You is like what 150,000 monthly
Yeah,
listeners, and TFK's at 3
yeah.
million.
Mhm.
Again, a massive difference here between the two bands. But Me Without You, all 150,000 of those people decided to vote, I guess.
The TFK fans threw up their rock fists, while Me Without You fans started throwing roses at them.
This does feel like the most like Joe Biden versus Trump kind of like actual demographic here. Does it not? Like out of all the like matchups between all these bands, like Me Without You being the Biden vote and Trump being the TFK vote,
Oh
like that
gosh.
that totally makes sense here. I'm
Yeah, it
surprised
totally does.
surprised TFK didn't have a steal the vote or steal the what was it? Steal the vote, steal the election thing. I'm sure they stormed Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Me Without You is headquartered.
They're putting another crack in that Liberty
That's
Bell.
right.
And
There you go. All right, so Me Without You ends up winning. I'm glad Me Without You wins here. I mean,
yeah, me too.
TFK was honestly one of the first Tooth and Nail bands I ever listened to. So I think even though I like very quickly fell out of love with them, TFK like I wouldn't probably be here without TFK. So I've at least got to like pay my respect. But at the end of the day, like Me Without You is such a much better band. I mean, fortunately the fans voted in that direction.
Yeah.
All right, so that finishes up the Sweet 16. A couple more matchups here. All right, Disciple versus the OC Supertones. Again, I have no idea where this is going. These are two bands that I'm not like don't have a huge affinity for, but that OC Supertones ends up beating out. Not like that big, but they handed it to Disciple, which is pretty impressive. Ska rules the day still.
Yeah, pretty sure Disciple retweeted that round too. Still got big.
Yeah, I mean, the Disciple did. I
Wow.
guarantee you. Like, does OC Supertones even have a Twitter account? Probably not even have a
I,
Twitter account.
I, I think it got hacked, and they haven't gotten it back in several years.
Okay, so they got hacked, and
Oh
OC
man.
Supertones are still winning this fucking shit. So this is like unbelievable to me that OC Supertones are able to win over a Disciple crowd that literally retweets to vote for us, and OC Supertones are coming out. The fans are coming out in droves. My goodness, these are the people that you tell them to stay in line, they will stay in line.
Yeah, that's
Rain or
funny to me.
shine. Disciple does feel like the kind of band that is like, you know what? Don't worry about like mail-in voting, but OC Supertones, mail-in voting, stay in line. I don't give a shit. You vote for us.
That
And
seems to be the
Disciples probably
ska
like,
way.
the mail-in
The
voting.
ska way,
What's the
yeah.
well, why people are mail-in voting? Like that's probably Disciples' whole thing to this whole thing. But anyway, OC Supertones winning it out again. So they're in the final four. Now we're moving on to Under Oath versus ABR. This is the matchup I feel like we had to have had in the solid state category. And Under Oath, again, very convincingly wins over ABR. And these are
This one
bands
surprised
that
me.
are probably
Yeah.
pretty close in Spotify numbers and probably dedicated fan bases. And yet, Under Oath wins pretty convincingly. I thought that this would be really close, and it ends up not being all that close at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought it would be
Yeah, we-
close.
surprising to me. 100% surprising. I would never have guessed.
I mean, I
that it would've
think
been that close.
I could have seen it go either way. I think Under Oath probably was going to take the edge, and certainly I ended up voting for Under Oath. But the fact that they won that much, 68% over 32%, that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
here we are, Under Oath over ABR. All right, so they're moving on to the final four with the OC Supertones. What a great matchup. All right. Elite Eight for the other round or the other side of the bracket. MXPX versus Blindside. Cullen, I know where you're going with this, but Eric, if you could have voted MXPX or over Blindside, where are you going to go with this?
Blindside easy. I was
Okay,
never
Blindside over MXPX for you. Okay, great. So I think we're all three in agreement here, but
How
MXPX
are we
wins
all
pretty
three-
convincingly over Blindside.
How are we all three in the minority here? That doesn't make sense to me either.
But again, I think like we weren't probably the biggest like pop punk fans, but clearly
Yeah,
that's a huge that MXPX world. You don't fuck with them.
yeah. So that's like the battle between pop punk and more like hardcore punk, right?
Right. I mean, it's
Because
like,
like Blindside's early stuff is more hardcore punk. So
yeah. I mean, totally. I mean, it's like who you gonna vote for? Like Have Heart or Fall Out Boy?
yeah,
Like, of course, Fall Out Boy's gonna get more votes. But the fact that Blindside made it this far, Elite Eight, pretty impressive. I would have loved to seen them in the Final Four. I feel like they at least deserve that. But the fact that they're in the same region as MXPX, like, it's gonna be really hard to beat any MXPX team. Like, let's be honest.
I do know that some people told me they were just going to vote based on the output with a Tooth and Nail label, which would have hurt Blindside here, considering they only had two albums. I don't know that it would have been enough for them to overtake MXPX, but it probably would have been closer.
Did MXPX did they have three or they had probably four, maybe five?
Yeah,
Tooth and Nail albums.
4 or 5.
I think it's 4.
So I mean, output that makes sense, but still, like those first 3 albums, God, it's just tough. But yeah, Blindside over MX, it's just tough. But MXPX prevails. All right, next one, the closest vote yet
of the entire thing. Yeah,
this literally, I remember Lindsay Fickus, who we've interviewed. She was literally like tweeting out, "If you're in line, you stay in line." Amberlynn versus Me Without You. And even though there was a pretty big Spotify difference here, Me Without You prevails 50.2 over 59 or 49.8.
yeah,
That's
so
like got to be
close.
what, like 50 votes difference?
Yeah,
Like
I
maybe
think
less
somebody
than that?
I think somebody said it was like 40 votes or something.
Oh my
Oh
god.
my heavens, that's
That
nuts.
that deserves a recount. I mean, Amberlynn, if there was any reason for them to storm the Capitol, this feels valid reason for them to storm the Capitol. This is so close, and yet Me Without You pulls it out. This is a big deal for me as a Me Without You fan. Although I love both bands, but the fact that Me Without You was able to squeak this one out, it's pretty impressive. But 40 votes. That's how close this came. That's impressive.
Yeah, that's nuts.
So here we are. Our final four. I'll repeat. Our final four is the OC Supertones versus Underoath, and then MXPX versus Me Without You. We're gonna go back to the other side of the bracket. So OC Supertones versus Underoath, and we're starting to get really close matchups here. And the OC Supertones barely squeak it out over Underoath. This to me blows my mind. Again, OC Supertones, I totally get getting to the Final Four. That makes sense to me. But over Underoath to get to the championship does not make any sense to me. I thought Underoath would for sure get into the championship game. And here we are with the OC Supertones taking what I think is the upset over Underoath.
I think this is a numbers thing. So there's only like a handful of ska bands that were really, really big. OC Supertones were like the Christian example of that. There was a bunch of metalcore bands that got really big. Underoath just being the biggest of those. I think that there was just probably you're able to concentrate all your ska fans into OC Supertones, whereas you're not necessarily able to concentrate all your metalcore fans into Underoath. I think that's like the only answer here that makes sense. What do you guys think?
I mean, it's so weird to think like ska versus metalcore. I still thought Underoath would prevail here. It is.
I did too. I
It's
did
just
too.
it's mind blowing to me how dedicated the ska world is. I mean, it is. What's even more mind blowing is the fact that ska continues to get so. It is repeatedly so popular in these, at least in these brackets, and yet hasn't been a revival. Metalcore's still around. There's still great metalcore bands, and those bands are still around doing their thing, and there's new bands coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the new ska band or whatever? Like that doesn't exist. It's mind blowing to me that fan base is still that dedicated to a thing that existed 25 years ago.
Yeah. To 15 songs on an album that all sound the same. Oh, sorry. That was disrespectful. That's my bad.
Well,
Eric, thoughts?
While I didn't like fill out a bracket on what I thought would happen or vote or anything, I predicted that the Final Four would be Supertones against Underoath, but I thought Underoath would have this one easy. I'm really surprised.
Who are in your championship game? Did you have Underoath versus Me Without You, or
I had
MXPX versus Underoath?
MXPX versus Underoath.
That would make sense to me. Cullen, I don't know if you filled out a bracket or not, but who would you have had in your championship game?
I probably would have had Underoath and Jeremy Camp.
But Jeremy Camp was in the same, so that would have been Final Four. Jeremy Camp versus Underoath.
Yep, that's what I would have had in my Final Four. Is that what you're asking?
And then the other, the championship game. So
so for the championship, I would have had Underoath versus let me think here quick.
Like Me Without You, MXPX, Blindside, Amberlin.
I definitely would have said Me Without You. I would not have said Blindside, even though I want them to. I probably would have said MXPX.
Oh, so you would have put MXPX over in Underoath in the championship.
Yeah.
I would have put Me Without You and Underoath in the championship. I think I would have personally voted for. I would have figured that MXPX and Me Without You were going to be in the Final Four, and I would have voted for Me Without You, and I think they would have had a fighting chance. And I was hoping that it would be Me Without You versus Underoath. So, but Supertones ends up beating out Underoath. Let's go to the other side of the bracket. MXPX versus Me Without You. And I was right. MXPX loses to Me Without You in a 52% to 48% vote. Pretty damn close game. But my goodness, I was not expecting. Honestly, I was just like putting my vote out there and hoping for the best that Me Without You would win. But Cullen, I bet you're pretty happy about this, that MXPX ends up losing in the Final Four to Me Without You.
I'm very happy about that. I love Me Without You, and I think that they're a far better band than MXPX. I'm just surprised because it's not very often that a better band all around to like a more esteemed listener wins out,
That's
in my
true.
opinion.
That's true.
What's what?
Eric, any thoughts about this MXPX versus Me Without You matchup? That's a to me it seems like an upset. I could be wrong, but it seems to me like to be an upset.
Well, this is actually a rematch of a Elite Eight matchup in the Big CCM tournament, where MXPX won 56% to 44%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh man.
So Lindsay, shout out to you to like rally the troops of Me Without You. My goodness. So why do you think that? Do you think it's the nature of the bracket that Me Without You ends up winning this one versus MXPX winning the CCM one? Do you think it's just this one being a tooth and nail one versus MXPX winning the CCM one, or do you think it's just like a voting thing where the Me Without You fans come out in droves, or what? What do you think? Why do you think there's that difference there?
I think Five Iron Frenzy won the CCM tournament, and my understanding is that there's a relationship between MXPX and Five Iron Frenzy. So I'm
Correct.
pretty sure that Five Iron Frenzy voters in the CCM tournament were also voting for MXPX, which
Sure, certainly,
would have
yeah,
given
that
them.
totally makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, but why do you think you said MXPX beat out Me Without You though in the Elite Eight?
Yeah.
Why do you think MXPX beat them out in the Elite Eight, Me Without You in the Elite Eight in that bracket, but not this one in the Final Four?
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at. Like the main CCM tournament, Five Iron Frenzy was rallying all their voters where they had no
I see.
input into this
Okay,
one. So
that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here we are.
Classic third party voters,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Damn libertarians. All right, so OC Supertones versus Me Without You. All right, if you're watching this on YouTube, you have not been able to see the champion. We don't know who the champion is. We're literally recording right now, not knowing who the champion is. I have it
It's
pulled
true.
up on Twitter, and I made sure not to look at the results, but I have it pulled up on Twitter right now. Who the championship is, and who has won the Tooth and Nail champion, and let me. It's still like I still have you muted, Eric. So, here we go. All right. I'm gonna pull this up here, and we're gonna find out who ends up winning. But it is
What?
all right.
Wow.
Me Without You with
What?
57% of the vote over OC Supertones with 43% of the vote.
No way.
I'm actually kind of shocked by this. How well OC Supertones were doing throughout the tournament. I thought that the troops would rally here. But
Yeah.
Me Without You ends up winning the Tooth and Nail Championship. And there were over 1,000 votes in the final. That is impressive.
How?
Father Josh Kulik, I don't know how to say your last name, but you're at least on our screenshot here, and you were asking if you were voting as my high school self or my college self. You're voting as yourself. I don't care who you are. You're voting as yourself, and Me Without You ends up winning over the OC Supertones. I do think that these are two different fan bases, but I think they are fan bases that would, at the very least, respect one another. Like, if Me Without You hadn't been in this tournament, or in this championship, but the OC Supertones were, I think those Me Without You fans would have voted for OC Supertones, and vice versa. If the OC Supertones weren't in this championship, but Me Without You was, I think Me Without You would have gotten the fans from the OC Supertones. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'm thinking.
I would never throw my hat in with a ska fan.
I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about in general.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you're talking about in general, I'm just saying in general, that's not what I would do. So
Well,
I'm a Me Without You fan.
I get that, and I wouldn't either. But I likely whoever the other band was, I would probably have voted for the other band over the OC Supertones. But I do see that there is a respect from each fan base for the other band.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
I'd be curious to know if Under Oath ends up pulling out a victory there, who wins between Me Without You and Under Oath.
That is a good. I think it might
Yeah.
be closer than the OC Supertones versus Me Without You.
Mhm.
What do you think, Eric? What do you think about this matchup, and what do you think about any like possible other matchups that it could have been?
Yeah, I think it would have been a lot closer if it was Me Without You versus Under Oath, because those first Me Without You albums were kind of heavier and actually solid state releases. So there's a little more in common there between the two that I think could have swayed some voters the other way.
Yeah.
Um, as far
And
as the
yet,
result of this, I'm always surprised when Ska loses anymore. So
it's true.
That's
But the fact that
that's
ska
wild.
gets this far, and again,
Yeah.
this is not like 5 votes. I mean, this final round was 1,000 votes, and they were probably collectively tens of thousands of votes in
Yeah.
this tournament. The fact that ska remains so beloved, it blows my mind. I mean, even the fact that they're even competing this much with Me Without You, 57 to 43%, blows my mind. But yet here we are. But I honestly, I couldn't be happier. Even though the Chariot's my favorite band of all time and happens to be on, the Solid State Tooth and Nail world, and they got eliminated right away in the first round, I would have predicted it to be Under Oath versus Me Without You, but I at least got one of them in, and Me
Yeah.
Without You ends up
Yeah.
winning, and I think rightfully so. I mean, Me Without You is one of those bands that has the respect from so many different people. Even Haley Williams from Paramore is like the biggest Me Without You fan. And you get a band that literally can play an acoustic guitar at a show and people are literally moshing. No other band in the world
Yeah.
is like that. And I feel like Me Without You, for that reason alone, respectfully wins the Tooth and Nail tournament.
Yeah. I'm gonna say ditto.
Yeah, I'm happy
I
with
love
it. There were maybe 5 bands that I feel like had a rightful claim to being, the quintessential Tooth and Nail band, and Me Without You are one of them.
Yeah.
So I'm
What
glad
what
that they
are
won.
so Me Without You, Under Oath, OC Supertones maybe was that other third band. What are the other couple bands that you're thinking?
MXPX and Anberlin. I think those would
Yeah,
be
those
the
those feel like the 5 that feels like the 5 that should be at least in the final 4, or
yeah.
if they could have been all in the final 4, that makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That seems right. It's pretty remarkable that a band of 150,000 monthly listeners ends up winning. And maybe it's a recency bias thing, right? Because Me Without You just broke up. Everybody's still like heartbroken about Me Without You. Maybe it's that over the OC Supertones, but still, I really do think Me Without You is one of those bands that even outside of the Christian indie world, I think there are lots of artists who are like, I am not an artist because I wouldn't be an artist because without Me Without You.
Yeah,
That's how
Yeah.
influential they
Sure.
are. And
definitely.
I do think, as much as we hear MXPX, I do think Me Without You versus Under Oath, those are like 2 of the more influential bands that we consistently hear. MXPX is one of those 2. But those are
Yeah.
like the 2 or 3 bands that we hear consistently as influential. And so it makes sense why a band like Me Without You would get this far and then end up winning it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and Eric, Me Without You didn't help with it at all, right? Like they weren't retweeting you or anything, right?
No, they weren't. Other people, plenty of other people retweeted saying "Vote for Me Without You," and I even saw some people posting it on Facebook. Vote for
Great.
Me Without You. So the fans definitely helped there.
They came in.
Well,
Yeah.
here
Came
we
in to
are
fight. I love it.
with Me
I love
Without
it.
You. I'm very happy with this result. Again, as somebody who didn't really grow up in the ska world, I know the OC Supertones are great, wonderful. Glad that they got to the final, the championship round, but I feel like the rightful winners got the, this doesn't feel like a stab in the heart kind of championship type of win.
No, they deserved
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, they
Yeah, for
they
sure.
they absolutely deserve it. So, well, Me Without You wins the whole thing. Any final conclusions about the entire tournament in general? I'm just curious, like any kind of like overarching ideas, thoughts, themes that you saw throughout it. Any ideas around that?
I think it's a wonderful experiment to kind of see where there's different interests and where those loyalties lie. Um, some of them, just like in any bracket, but some of them just didn't make sense how they were winning by a little bit and then all of a sudden by a lot on the very next round, or not at all on the next round. Where the support wanes and waxes is interesting to me. It makes you wonder where the thought process was and where those loyalties really lie. But Eric, I gotta say thank you for doing the Lord's work here, because this is important data. We have to have this kind of stuff.
Oh, it was fun. I enjoy doing it for the most part.
For the most part, what don't you like about it?
There can be usually about halfway through I get a little tired of all the comments. This band should have been in it. This band should have been seated higher. This band should have this. I brush it off for a while, and then about halfway through, it gets to me a little bit, and then I regain my strength, and I'm very happy with things by the time it's over.
See, this is where
Well,
you just like have to like
wonderful
figure out how to be argumentative on Twitter just for the like, even if you don't really actually care, you just like you got to argue on Twitter just for the sake of arguing on Twitter, because that's like so much fun.
Oh, it's so exhausting though. It
So-
takes all my energy.
Look over at the screenshot right here and see how many notifications Mason has on this screenshot.
Yeah, I don't even need to.
Like,
I don't know how he.
Those are all those are 20 different arguments that Mason's like gonna go have here.
I
in
don't
this
know
few
how he
minutes,
does
I'm
it.
sure.
I sent him a message not long ago saying, "How in the world do you do this? You have 20 times more followers than I do, and I feel like I can't keep up with things."
You just be ridiculous. You don't give much
spends a
thought.
lot
You just say whatever the first thing that comes to mind, and you just say that.
Mason also, anytime we're hanging out, he spends an exclusionary amount of time on the toilet. I feel like hemorrhoids have to be a part of this whole situation.
Well, we don't
because,
need to talk about that
how
right
long
now.
he spends in the toilet. He's just arguing only on the toilet. It's like it's his space.
Well, and if only they knew that that's where I am doing, that's how serious I'm taking the arguments from them. They're putting like all this thought. They're like probably, they're like Googling shit. They're putting all this research in, and I'm like, I'm just saying whatever comes to mind while I'm sitting on Cullen Mac's toilet.
And I'm perfectly
much I
fine
care.
with people disagreeing with me. I'm fine with that. It's
Yeah.
just when people are jerks about it that it gets to me.
Yeah.
Wow, we should have been
understandably
jerks, Cullen.
so.
That would have been fun.
No, that's not nice. Eric's awesome.
Thank
Eric's
you.
great. Hey, Eric, we're gonna bring you back on at some point. We should do like a very like niche Christian, like super like underrated. Nobody knows about them, like Christian band thing. Nobody might listen, but it would be really fun.
Yeah.
And so-
Less than 1,000 Spotify listeners.
do it.
yes, that would be.
Yeah.
And we could title it like 1,000 Spotify listener or less Christian music artist tournament or something like that. That would be a fun time.
Hey,
That would
we
be
could even
fun.
put it out there and like ask bands that have less than 1,000 to
Yeah,
give us their
vouch.
argument as
Yeah,
to why
vouch
they
for
should do
themselves.
it.
That'd be
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
That would be a lot of fun.
But anyway, thank you so much, Eric. This has been so much fun. It's been so cool to just like see this whole thing blow up and so many people be a part of this. And also, congratulations to Me Without You. Round of applause to Me Without You. Unbelievable. So great. Such an incredible band and rightfully deserving of the top tooth and nail artist of all time. So here we
Yeah.
are. Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man.